Good day to our dear speakers and online participants. I would like to welcome you to our annual workshop called Mapping China's Footprint in the World, Volume 3. This year we have to meet online due to COVID-19 pandemic, but we hope that our cooperation will help us to win over all PRC viruses and meet the next year again in Prague face-to-face. Our debate is organized by non-profit Projekt Sinopsis, organization Acamedia, and co-organized by the Oriental Institute of the Czech Academy of Science. Before we start, let me inform you a bit about our program. Today we are going to have two panels. Each is going to last approximately 2 hours. Each speaker has 15 to 20 minutes. And after we finish the presentations, there is 1 hour discussion between the panelists and questions from registered guests. So please, if you have a question, feel free to write and send them to our chat channel or post them to our Facebook. Also, if you have any technical difficulties, contact us via chat. We have our IT team here that is ready to help you. We are going also to continue our seminar tomorrow. We will start at 9:30 a.m. CST. We will send you the invitation today again. Now let me maybe pass our virtual microphone to Professor Olga Lomová from the Sinology Department of Charles University, and she's also the Sinopsis board member. She's also the Sinopsis board member. So Professor Lomová, floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everybody. I have just a brief remark to open the conference, which I feel honored and pleased to do. I want to say a few words about the Sinopsis project, just introducing its main purpose, perhaps briefly its history and how it fits into my or our academic work and the activities of the Department of Sinology at the Charles University in Prague. As you know, it is a collaborative project between this non-profit organization Acamedia and the Department of Sinology. When the project was established some 6 years ago, we still didn't have Department of Sinology. We only had Institute of East Asian Studies, which I happened to be director of at that time. So in the beginning, the partner and main collaborator was the Institute, just to explain for you who followed the project for several years. Put simply, the project, at least as it was established aims at mediating academic knowledge to primary media and interested public. That's why it is embedded in the Acamedia non-profit organization. The project came to existence at the time of U-turn in Czech-Chinese relations and Czech foreign policy, embracing PRC as a strategic partner in, I would say, rather haphazard and hurried way. We sinologists realized how little both the politicians and the media reporting about it are prepared to understand the true significance of the events and to understand the Chinese situation as a whole. The discourse in the media and, well, among the politicians was governed by stereotypes of China as a Confucian benevolent power. Still, in the beginning of the 21st century, we can hear such fairy tales, and a source of golden opportunities for Czech businesses. I would be at that time occasionally asked for commentary in the media, but I felt whenever I obeyed, and I did so, there is not enough space to explain and provide deeper insight into the whole complex issue of modern China and international involvement with China. So this was one of the reasons why we started the project. At the same time, the project like Sinopsis, which bridges academic knowledge and general public or the discourse outside of the academic sphere, also responds or corresponds to broader trend in area studies and academia in general. I have on my mind what we call in Czech Republic the third role of the university, which is in British universities called outreach, and I guess differently, but with the same meaning, is mentioned in other academic environment as well. It also corresponds, I mean, the endeavor and the topics we work on and we try to develop correspond also to recent changes in understanding of our academic field itself, which should go on in some of its traditional outlines, but is adapting to new environment. And I have on my mind solid philological knowledge as the basis of any discussion about China, and also broad background in history and culture, two things indispensable for understanding properly current situation in China, current society, politics, etc., and also to give well-informed suggestions for the policymakers, and engaging this solid knowledge of, let's say, sinological knowledge with contemporary issues. And of course, the new sinology discussed some years ago comes perhaps to your mind, but similar trends are observable again in other universities as well. We have the privilege of not having a Confucius Institute, so we are not under any direct pressure from the Chinese side, but at the same time, our position in the university was not always easy. There were certain attempts to put pressure on the project, or at least to dissociate it from the university, as there were some subjects who didn't like how we discussed the whole situation in Czech-Chinese relations, and how we did not support the over-optimistic rosy picture of China. But I have to say, and I'm pleased to say so, that we always had a great support for our colleagues, and not only in sinological department. It was very surprising, but suddenly colleagues all over the Faculty of Arts would contact me and would thank me for what I'm writing, and we are writing in Sinopsis, and gave us a lot of support. And there is also a visible interest and support from among the students, which is, I think, the most positive aspect of this, of our functioning between, well, academia and broader public, because it gives me hope that we will be able to continue on long-term, steady basis with well-informed and enthusiastic collaborators. And I think this is what I wanted to say. Over the years, the Sinopsis project also has gradually developed a more robust research dimension, which was not originally the primary goal of the project. And I will ask Martin Hala to say a few words about this.
Thank you, Olga. So let me first thank everybody for joining us in what is now already the third annual conference of Projekt Sinopsis. The previous two events were kind of low profile. This one is now actually streamed live to the public. So there should be many more people listening to our discussions this year. And since there are many more new people hopefully watching this event, many of whom may not be familiar with Projekt Sinopsis, let me also say a few words about what I think is important about our project and what I think makes it special. We officially started the project in 2016, but the formal establishment was basically just an institutionalization of work that many of us have been doing in some cases with some of the older members of the project, like myself and Professor Lomova. Basically, for decades, we have been trying to look at the People's Republic of China and, more importantly, at the Communist Party of China from its own perspective, through its own lens, on the basis of their own documents and their own discourse. And I think this perspective is quite important. In my mind, the biggest mistake that the West has made, and the root of the current problem that the world is facing with the People's Republic of China, is that very often we have been looking at China from the outside in, and we have been projecting our wishful thinking on something that didn't quite comply with our wishes. Essentially, the West has been applying international relations theories derived from the Western experience onto the PRC from the outside. But of course, the PRC and the CCP, they have their own agency and their own logic. And they're perfectly capable of implementing it to the constant consternation of observers outside. I would argue that the West has been ignoring the internal logic of the Leninist system in the PRC at its own peril. The application of Western IR theories essentially led to the normalization of what is, in a sense, a very extraordinary system. And that normalization resulted in drawing the wrong conclusions and very often self-defeating policies. So ironically, here in Central and Eastern Europe, the normalizing discourse had been delayed by about a decade in comparison with the West, mostly because due to our own experience before 1989, there was in the East European societies a lot of skepticism towards this kind of normalization of the Leninist system. It all changed after 2008, the global financial crisis, and then further still after 2015, after the refugee crisis in Europe. That led many to question their assumptions that they've arrived at in 1989. So about a decade ago, we have essentially joined the normalizing trend ourselves here in Eastern Europe. Ironically, it largely coincided with the onset of Xi Jinping's new era. When the attitude towards the People's Republic of China slowly started to change in some parts of the world. So this belated change of attitude in Eastern Europe made it even more out of place, and I would argue out of sync with much of the world. In the Czech Republic, this new wishful and optimistic outlook on China materialized in what is known as the so-called reset of diplomatic relations with China in 2013 and the subsequent economic diplomacy. This has been driven, apart from misguided expectations of large-scale investment and other economic benefits, also by corporate greed and some other particular interests, local interests. I have always been emphasizing that the Czech Republic actually presents a great case study because of the steep rise and then very sudden fall in Chinese influence in the country. The story here in the Czech Republic has been concentrated into a relatively self-contained group of actors. and has played out over a relatively short period of time, which makes it a great subject to study. And with our sinological training, we are arguably well equipped to investigate it and analyze it, drawing conclusions that might be relevant far beyond the borders of the Czech Republic. But we not only analyze and describe the situation, we have also been trying to communicate it. And this is one of the distinct characteristics of the project, that since the beginning, we have been working very closely with the mainstream media to get the stories out where it matters, to impact the public discourse, because there's quite a bit of knowledge in the academic and think tank world about contemporary China, but it doesn't always trickle down to the public discourse where it is badly needed. So we have, in the past 5 years, we have published something like, I think it's close to 1,000 texts in various formats, from academic papers down to op-eds and other articles. We have also made a number of public appearances on television and radio. So we've been trying to go out to the public with the knowledge that we have obtained in the process of our work. And the discourse indeed has changed in the last 5 years in the Czech Republic. And I would say that we probably have one of the liveliest debates on China in this country at this point. I guess the impact might best be measured in negative terms in the attacks that we've been exposed to. Sinopsis in the past few years has been front and center in just about every major controversy regarding China in the Czech Republic. We've been receiving cease and desist orders. Politicians and corporate actors have been trying to silence us, discredit us, and dislodge us from the university. And I would say that all of this mostly only served to increase our impact in the end, because it provided us with additional publicity. Now, we do not only focus on the Czech Republic, even though that was our initial raison d'etre, but we have since expanded our activities, as Olga mentioned, into international research. We're trying to look at the CCP in comparative perspective, because especially in smaller countries, you can only have full picture of what's going on, and if you compare it with the experience from other places, from other countries. And to this end, we have been trying to conduct what we call networked research, engaging individual researchers in other countries, and sometimes focusing on projects with whole institutions. And the current workshop, the workshop that you're about to attend, has basically been the result of that, bringing together perspectives from various places, different countries, that are guided by essentially the same methodology of trying to analyze things from the inside, trying to base our research on what the actual actors are themselves saying about their own activities, instead of looking from the outside in and imposing our thinking on a subject that may not necessarily comply. So, because we have a rich program, I think I'll end right here, so I don't take unnecessarily any more time, and I'll hand it over back to Katka. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin, and thank you, Professor Lomova. I should say maybe for some of you that Martin is a director of Sinopsis and also founder of Projekt Sinopsis. So now let me introduce speakers of our first panel, panel 0, called the CCP and Technology Transfer. I hope that we have all speakers log in. Yes. So firstly, I would like to warmly welcome Alex Joske from Australian Strategic Policy Institute, who is going to present his work, the CCP's talent recruitment efforts. Welcome, Alex. Pleasure having you here.
Thank you.
Second speaker, also from Australian Strategic Policy Institute, is Audrey Fritz, going to talk about university involvement in China's military-civil fusion strategy. Welcome as well. I hope he's here with us. And Didi Kirsten Tatlow, Senior Non-Resident Fellow at Sinopsis and Senior Fellow at the DGAP. She's going to talk about, or her presentation is called Beyond Espionage, China's Quest for Foreign Technology. Didi, pleasure having you here as well.
Thank you.
And our fourth speaker is my colleague, researcher at Sinopsis, Philip Jarosz, presenting his research called The Disregarded Interest, Czech Academic Exchange with PRC Defense Link Entities. Philip, welcome.
Thank you very much.
So we have an excellent line up and heavy topic to tackle. So without further ado, I would like to ask our first speaker for 15 to 20 minutes presentation. So passing our virtual microphone to Canberra now. Alex, could you start, please?
Okay, thank you, Katerina. No, it's wonderful to be virtually back with Sinopsis at this conference. It was always a highlight in the past, going to Prague for this, but it's still nice to get together. And unfortunately, I'll probably leave before the end of the whole panel because it's quite late here in Australia. But I'll get into it. So I'm going to be talking about the Chinese government's talent recruitment efforts, which are the focus of a recent paper of mine called "Hunting the Phoenix: The Chinese Communist Party's Search for Overseas Talent and Technology." And talent recruitment programs by the Chinese government have attracted a lot of attention recently, and the best known of these is the 1,000 Talents Plan, which is really just the tip of the iceberg. And I think nearly all of the attention that's been focused on China's talent recruitment programs has been focused on the 1,000 Talents Plan and also on the United States. But that's a very, very small slice of this broader picture of efforts by the Chinese government to bring scientists in from around the world, get expertise, get talent, get technology from developed countries with cutting-edge technology, and make it serve the interests of the Chinese Communist Party, whether that's the Chinese economy, military-civil fusion, or the security state. There's a very wide range of activity, and the 1,000 Talents Plan is just one of at least 200 talent recruitment programs that the Chinese government has set up and run. And the United States probably accounts for less than half of talent recruitment activity around the world. So in this presentation, I'll just quickly go over what these programs are, why they're concerning, how they actually recruit people, which is one of the focuses of my paper, and how this is a really interesting example of the integration of United Front work, which we normally hear about in a political influence context, and technology transfer efforts of the Chinese government, because I think this overlap really tells you a lot about United Front work. So, over the past year, there's been an incredible number of prosecutions, firings, disciplinings of US scientists because primarily of their links to Chinese government talent recruitment programs. I think by now, over 24 US scientists have been charged with a range of crimes associated with talent recruitment programs. These go from lying to federal authorities, tax evasion, economic espionage, lying on grant declarations, failing to declare foreign funding. So it's a really wide range of activity. And I think that's important to keep in mind with China's talent recruitment programs. They're much more complex than a straightforward economic espionage, counterintelligence problem. I think they'd probably be easier to think about and easier to respond to, ironically, if it were just about spies coming from China to suck up technology. and bring it back. Talent recruitment programs are much more complex. I think they include some aspects of illegal activity and straightforward espionage, but more broadly, they're about creating flexible incentives that can encourage overseas scientists to align their work with the Chinese Communist Party's goals and bring valuable technology and also their expertise to China, to serve China. So one end of the spectrum of problematic activity is, of course, espionage, theft, straightforward, black activity. And one of the clearest examples is that of Zheng Xiaoqing, a former GE aviation engineer and a specialist in gas turbines, jet engines, essentially. He was recruited to the 1,000 Talents Plan to work in AVIC, the Chinese military aircraft manufacturer, while he was still working for GE Aviation. He didn't declare this. He also set up a company in China, in fact, 2 companies, commercializing the same kinds of research that he was doing for GE Aviation. And somewhere along this process, he was also, it seems, recruited by the Jiangsu State Security Bureau, which is the Jiangsu branch of the Ministry of State Security, China's foreign intelligence and counterintelligence agency. What he did eventually was upload source code from GE, trade secrets, to his iCloud account, and then send that information to China. Upload that information and encrypt it into an image of a sunset, and then he brought that image to China. So it's quite interesting and sophisticated tradecraft in this case, and it's an example of professional intelligence agencies getting involved in talent recruitment work through the 1,000 Talents Plan. But to my knowledge, that's the only known case of someone being recruited to a talent recruitment program and stealing technology as part of a professional intelligence operation. But it seems like this kind of misconduct and theft is actually built into talent recruitment programs. For example, many of the other agencies that oversee the 1,000 Talents Plan and oversee the Chinese government's talent recruitment policy have themselves been implicated in theft and espionage. Agencies like the State Administration of Foreign Experts Affairs and the United Front Work Department. But then going further down the spectrum towards the middle, sort of grey zone activities that might involve some element of illegality, but generally could be hard to prove theft or economic espionage in these cases. You get into people who are failing to declare conflicts of interest, failing to declare conflicts of commitment, and also not declaring commercialization of research. And again, this goes back to, I think, the flexibility of the Chinese government's talent recruitment programs, where it will often allow researchers to join the 1,000 Talents Plan while also keeping their original job in the United States, in France, in the Czech Republic, or in Australia, just to give a few examples. So it seems that a high proportion, but certainly not all, participants in these programs don't fully declare some of the obligations that they're taking up by joining a Chinese government talent recruitment program and accepting money, agreeing to run labs or research projects in China, and quite often agreeing to assign intellectual property to Chinese institutions. While the example I gave earlier of Zheng Xiaoqing, the GE aviation scientist, was focused on a dual-use technology, jet engines, something with clear military applications. In fact, I think talent recruitment efforts have been shown by research at Georgetown's Center for Security Emerging Technologies to be about much more than just defense technologies. Economics, advancing China's technological development, and in some quite concerning cases, supporting the Chinese state's human rights abuses and rollout of surveillance technologies are all part of these talent recruitment efforts. So there's a moral component to these concerns as well. And perhaps one of the best examples of this, of undeclared commercialization, conflicts of interest, and moral concerns is a case in Australia that I wrote about last year. A professor who was then at the University of Queensland called Shen Hongtao. In 2014, he was recruited to the 1,000 Talents Plan by the University of Electronic Science and Technology in China, a very strongly military-linked university that specializes in electronics and communications technology. And in this decade, that involves artificial intelligence. And that's Shen Hongtao's area of expertise. He specialized in image processing, video processing. And then one of the many applications of this technology is facial recognition. After joining the 1,000 Talents Plan, while also being a professor at the University of Queensland, he set up a company in China called quite cutely Koala AI, but it was a facial recognition technology company selling surveillance technology to China's Ministry of Public Security, working, in fact, in one case directly with the Public Security Bureau. And one of its clients, according to a presentation given by an executive from the company, is the Xinjiang authorities in Xinjiang, where Koala AI's equipment is used to monitor the border region between Xinjiang and I think Kazakhstan, where you'll probably be seeing many Uyghurs and ethnic Kazakhs in Xinjiang trying to flee and trying to get away from the human rights abuses there. Later it emerged that, according to the University of Queensland, this professor hadn't declared his intention to commercialize research. He hadn't declared any of these conflicts of interest. And actually, while receiving, while joining the 1,000 Talents Plan, he was also a recipient of Australian government fellowships. And these are full-time fellowships that essentially pay you to work full-time on an Australian government-funded research project at a university. So this is really quite a concerning case that shows a lot of moral risks, but also quite a strong emphasis on commercialization in China's talent recruitment efforts. His company, Koala AI, is now worth, by their own claims, I think over $1 billion. Which makes it, probably much larger than most artificial intelligence companies in Australia. And at the very beginning of that process of setting up his company and growing it, he received funding from companies, from startup funds linked to the 1,000 Talents Plan itself, because there are dedicated venture capital structures tailored to match the needs of the 1,000 Talents Plan and facilitate commercialization by participants in China's talent recruitment programs. Another really interesting example that goes to one of the key findings of this report is that of Cao Guangzhi, a scientist at Tesla. Tesla has alleged that in 2018, Cao Guangzhi uploaded their autopilot source code to the cloud and then left to work for a Chinese competitor company, Xiaopeng Motors. But very, very far back, in fact, nearly 10 years before he allegedly did this, he was running what's called a talent recruitment station. And talent recruitment stations are something that I think is discussed for the first time in detail in this report of mine. And they represent a key part of the actual infrastructure of China's talent recruitment efforts. These are generally contractual relationships that the Chinese government enters with overseas United Front groups, where they're getting paid to build databases of overseas scientists, bring overseas scientists on trips to China, and eventually recruit scientists into talent recruitment programs. 600 of these scientists, we were able to identify 600 of these talent recruitment stations around the world. Over 100 of them were in the United States, but Australia, Germany, France, the United Kingdom, Canada, all of these countries had high numbers of talent recruitment stations that point to very high levels of talent recruitment activity by the Chinese government. So back to Cao Guangzhi, He graduated from Duke University, I think, in 2009 with a PhD. And about the same time, he set up a United Front group with a couple of friends. And it was a United Front group specifically for PhD students from Wenzhou, which is a city in China that has a nearly impossible dialect to learn, supposedly, and also pumps out scientists and mathematicians for some reason. And not long after its establishment, his United Front group received a list of potential recruits, Wenzhou-born scientists and students in the United States who they could recruit as members. They also signed an agreement to run a talent recruitment station on behalf of the Wenzhou government, and were bringing American scientists on trips to the United States. The group's members included people from Tesla, Apple, Google, Motorola, IBM, and even, they claim, the International Monetary Fund. So there's a long history of overlapping technology transfer and United Front work that's given in this example of Cao Guangzhu that goes many, many years before he's alleged to have engaged in this act of trade secrets theft by Tesla. So I think this really shows the importance of understanding and looking at the mechanisms of talent recruitment work, not just the individuals who are actually engaging in misconduct or illegal activity, but I think the actual organizations themselves that are recruiting people, the organizations paid to do recruitment work, targeting these groups as well as the individuals will really go a long way to managing, monitoring and controlling the situation in a much more effective way than essentially what is only managing the symptoms by going after people who've joined the programs and committed misconduct. So I think finally I'll just touch on how this integrates with United Front work. In the case of Cao Guangzhu, he was quite clearly working with the United Front Work Department to help grow his group and carry out talent recruitment work. So this I think really hammers home the fact that the United Front system is much broader than the United Front Work Department. It involves agencies like the Ministry of Science and Technology, which for a time until recently was headed by a senior United Front official who was head of the Zhigong Party, one of the 8 minor parties that forms a core of the United Front. And also that the United Front system's goals are much broader than just political influence. It's United Front work. We have to understand it in its own terms. It's about uniting friends and potential allies and sympathizers and those who might have any sort of alignment with the party's goals in any area that matters to the party, aligning them with the party's interests and the party's intentions. So that's not just political, but it's also cultural. And importantly here, it's technological. So we can see in some cases the same groups and individuals, for example, with lady baits in the United Kingdom, which Clive Hamilton wrote about in his recent book, the same individuals who seem to be involved in the political side of United Front work, also involved in talent recruitment and technology transfer work. So the same infrastructure can be mobilized for a whole range of purposes that's useful to the party. And I'll leave it there.
Alex, thank you very much for your presentation. We will have a discussion after this, but now I will give a floor to Audrey Fritz. I hope that he's online, also from Australian Strategic Policy Institute. Audrey, hello. I will pass the floor to you. Yes, we can see you, but we can't hear you right now.
Oh, you can't hear me? Okay.
Perfect. So
can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. I have a here we go. Okay. I have a little presentation sharing. Okay. Can you all see the presentation okay?
Yes, it's perfect.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so yes, I will be sort of talking about military civil fusion and the sort of role that universities play in the military civil fusion strategy. And so first, I'm going to give a little bit of a brief overview of military civil fusion, and then I will talk about a little bit about university development plans and how they help universities to develop science and technology innovations, and then I'll also give a little case study as an example. And so to start off, military civil fusion can be defined as a strategy that strives to reinforce the People's Republic of China's ability to build the country into an economic, technological, and military superpower by leveraging the country's military and civilian industrial science and technology resources. And so the strategy is really aimed at promoting the sharing of resources and collaboration in research and applications, and this essentially ensures that the mutually beneficial combination of economic and national defense development. And so the concept of MCF is not new under Xi Jinping. The concept actually first emerged under Mao in the form of Zhenmin Jiangu. And so this is sort of where Mao promoted a strategy for developing military and civilian dual-use equipment. And so the term that is currently used for MCF, written here in Chinese, made its first appearance as a guiding principle in Hu Jintao's report on the 17th Party Congress in 2007, where Hu urged the country to, quote, take path of military civil fusion with Chinese characteristics. And so this translation of MCF was also not used until 5-year plans until the 12th 5-year plan in 2011. And so prior to this usage, the term civil military integration had been used, but by the time we start looking at the 13th 5-year plan, MCF in the translation that we look at is exclusively being used instead of the translation for civil military integration, which sort of suggests a shift in the government's promotion of the strategy. And so by 2015, Xi Jinping formally elevated MCF to a national strategy. Important that components of the strategy are woven into China's other national strategic priorities as well, which also makes its impact broad throughout China's government and society. And so there are several national plans dedicated to implementing and developing the MCF strategy, but there are also several national plans focusing more on science and technology development or economic development, and so these sectoral strategies. And so these also mention how the implementation of MCF can benefit so these non-MCF specific plans. And so here's some artificial intelligence development plans, strategic emerging industries, and it just shows sort of how broad MCF spans. And it also, looking at how MCF is brought into these plans, helps demonstrate the many ways that MCF is part of China's national strategy, and also particularly show how important the role of MCF is in science and technology, research and development, and sort of, so this is where universities also play an important role. And so for the university development plans, these consist of Project 211, Project 985, and more recently, the Double First Class University Plan. And so these sort of help universities develop their innovation efforts through means such as talent recruitment and accelerating science and technology innovation. And so Project 211 was implemented first in 1995 with a select 99 universities, and it focused on improving education quality, scientific research, and the management of the universities as a means to become a base for domestically cultivating high-level talents. And 2005 was the continuation of Project 211, and it selected 39 universities from those that had participated previously in Project 211. And the universities were selected based on which universities would be capable of achieving the status of a world-class university. And so as part of its talent recruitment strategy, Project 985 also focused on strengthening international cooperation in order to accelerate science and technology innovation. And then more recently, the Double First Class University Plan incorporates elements of both Projects 211 and 985, while also heavily focusing on the importance of talent recruitment. And so this strategy also explicitly states that China needs to advance technology for military use. And so this sort of demonstrates the progression of the development of university involvement in military research. And sort of more specifically with sort of talent recruitment and international cooperation have been key aspects of the university development plans, particularly for the 985 project and the Double First Class University Plan. And here in this quote, the Double First Class University Plan outlines its focus on deepening international cooperation and exchanges, and sort of this focus on international cooperation and establishing things like joint laboratories is part of the plans to promote science and technology innovation, which ultimately becomes sort of the backbone of the MCF strategy. And so, so the sort of overlap between the Double First Class University Plan is, and with MCF, is sort of its emphasis on the need to establish specialized technology transfer institutions and also new research and development centers. And so these tech centers or tech transfer centers are also a key aspect of the MCF strategy, and sort of due to the strategy's focus on development of dual-use technology and technology transfer efforts. So this is also a key part of the Double First Class University Plan in relation to MCF, and it also further emphasizes the importance of dual-use technologies development, sort of through stating that China needs to advance technology for military use. And it says that universities should essentially assist and actively participate in MCF. And so this is sort of the first university plan that is specifically referring to MCF and really describing how universities can participate in the science and technology innovation to better benefit the strategy. And so for a case study, I'm going to talk a little bit about Beijing Institute of Technology, and just sort of a comment on this. When Australia's Strategic Policy Institute, Alex, who just spoke, had published the China Defense Universities Tracker, and so I assisted with research on that, and one of the findings was in the National Defense Labs that university, both civilian and military affiliated universities have, and they're also given security credentials to enable their participation in different levels of defense-related projects. And so this is something that the Beijing Institute of Technology has. They are considered one of the universities considered one of the 7 Sons of National Defense. So it's deeply involved with national defense projects, and it has a first-class security credential. And it has also been a participant in the 985 project, the 211 project, and the Double First Class University Plan. And so sort of to just outline its role, the different aspects that it contributes to MCF. Here I'll talk about the Military Civil Fusion Institute that BIT established. And so in 2018, they unveiled the Beijing Institute of Technology Military Civil Fusion Innovation Institute, which focuses on serving the national MCF development strategy. And so the focus of this MCF Innovation Institute is on improving the innovation capability of MCF, attracting high quality scientific and technological resources, producing cutting edge innovations, and building an innovation system for MCF. And so at the unveiling in May 2018, the president of BIT gave a speech where he essentially discussed how involved BIT is with implementing the MCF strategy through its dedication to providing intellectual support for national defense, science, and technology innovation. And the president also explained that the focus of MCF in colleges and universities is to drive science and technology innovation, which he mentioned is necessary in order to accomplish the goals of strengthening the country's strong military dream. So here we can really see the role that a university can play in MCF, and especially in sort of military R&D. And so it also has a large presence in the Zhongguancun Science Park, which is considered the Valley of China and established owned military enterprises producing both military and civilian technologies by 2022. And so here's just a sort of short list of some of the S&T parks that BIT has partnered with, and so including Overseas Students Pioneers Park, ZTE, and other sort of high-tech companies. And so the park is composed of government departments, enterprises, and university research centers, which really create a system that encourages the collaboration between universities, private enterprises, and government. And so this really reflects the model of MCF as it encourages sharing of R&D for government and private enterprise use, and it's sort of that university, industry, government collaboration. And so in terms of international cooperation, BIT also has pretty extensive relations. And so BIT maintains many partner programs with international universities, which are aimed at attracting talent for BIT science and technology research. And most of these programs involve programs or alliances with science and technology departments of foreign academic institutions. And BIT is a member of different alliances that involve several countries. And these alliances aim to really create a platform for Chinese and international universities to cooperate and exchange resources, professors, students, scientific research, and training. And so here, one such lab includes universities from BIT, and then universities from the US and the UK. And then in another example, there are also universities that BIT cooperates with that are located in the US, Germany, and the UK. And then, so these are just a few examples. And so in terms of talent recruitment, as part of its talent recruitment strategy, BIT also holds overseas talent recruitment workstations globally. And one example of this that I found in 2018 is that BIT's overseas high-level talent recruitment team had traveled to the UK to recruit talents through its UK talent recruitment workstation. And so as of 2018, the UK overseas talent recruitment workstation was the second of its kind for BIT, and it had followed the establishment of a talent recruitment workstation in Singapore in 2018. So the talent recruitment strategies are also global. And so just to wrap up, university development plans have really laid the foundation for implementing MCF research, and development, and sort of due to the key role that universities play in driving the science and technology R&D, they certainly just more careful monitoring from international collaborators and foreign governments. So that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you very much, Audrey, for your presentation. And now I would like to give a floor to Didi, if she's online. Didi, please, if there's anything that you would like to share, please go ahead. I will advise you how to do that.
Yeah. Hi, thanks everyone. I am currently just trying to upload something. It's going a little badly for some reasons that I can't quite understand, but let me just start anyway. So thank you very much for being here. It's my second conference. Last year's was in person. It was very revelatory for me. Moving from a long time in journalism into a deeper research area, focusing on China and the party. Last year's conference was enormously helpful, and I'm sure this one will be too. And I also hope that others will, will learn as I did last year, as I continue to, in fact. So I think I really wanted to start, and I don't know if the screen is good right now. It looks a bit weird to me. Can you see me properly? The screen is weird. Okay. Well, I just wanted to start by basically showing this book, which we published on September the 23rd. We being a team of 2 editors and authors, plus 15 contributors around the world. We call it basically Beyond Espionage, which was our preferred title. We had to call it China's Quest for Foreign Technology because that is better on an internet search engine. That's how publishing works these days. If it's not searchable, it doesn't exist. So why did we call it Beyond Espionage? Because it is about China's quest for foreign technology, and it's about how 95% of that extraction around the world, which has been taking place in a organized and deliberate fashion since at least 1949, 95% of it takes place beyond espionage, i.e. in the public, openly, relatively openly. And the reason, of course, is that China has long struggled to catch up technologically and scientifically with the Western powers. Olga Lomanova mentioned the importance of a cultural, historical view. That's absolutely correct. We really need to gain that with China, or we can't talk about China from the inside out. And so what this book set out to do essentially was to present this enormous program as clearly as possible. It's difficult. It was a very difficult task, to be honest. It had to be conducted very academically in order to have every single proof of what we were saying. There are probably over 1,100 footnotes in the book. And I thought I'd just read to you the preface. This book is about China's rise as a neo-totalitarian technological power made possible through access to science and technology created by countries it now challenges for global leadership. That sort of shows what happened, the massive movement of technology back from the global West, plus Japan and Korea, for example, Australia too, but mostly the United States and Europe. Back to China, the kind of digestion of that technology, and then commercialization, very, very importantly, and overwhelmingly the way that this has happened, according to the language that the party uses, is 以多种方式, through all means possible, or through many means possible. So that really encompasses the whole gamut of the hundreds of thousands, perhaps 1 or 2 million Chinese students who have gone overseas, who've become professors, who've become professionals, who have learned in class, who've gone back or not gone back, have sent their knowledge back. That's the one end of it. the other end of it, of course, is absolute outright espionage and all the things in between. You know, let me quote again from the preface. Since 1949, a vast, deliberate, and unique system of foreign technology spotting and transfer has operated in China and overseas for China. Very little of it is secret. The projects are described in party and state documents, announced in the media, in Chinese mostly, and executed in venues that are, broadly speaking, not hidden from the outside world. And what this is all about, of course, is make the West serve China, 中体西用, very old issue that began 160 years ago in China now, maybe in 1860, something like that. 1870, when the first Chinese students went to America to study. We're talking 150 years now. So, you know, everything that's in this book kind of encompasses the things that the speakers before me have spoken about. I think, you know, there have been many phases. We touch in the book also on the fact that China is happy to occupy this position of perhaps not pursuing the basic science, the creativity, the innovation to the same extent, and certainly not in history to the same extent, that may be changing today, as people have in these sort of post-Enlightenment societies of the West, but to kind of take home, commercialize, adapt, turn it into a lot of money. And that's the process we're seeing now, with all the companies coming back out and talking about the Huawei's, the ZTEs, the TikToks, the WeChats, the Alibaba, the Anthis, and, you know, all these kinds of companies. So, you know, we do touch there culturally on why this is the case and why this suits. The key point, of course, is that it enables the Communist Party to stay completely in control of its own culture and society, while gaining all the benefits of the kind of the chaos that comes with the kind of creativity of Western societies and notions of individualism, self-exploration, self-expression. And it is chaotic, and there is a high price to pay for these kinds of societies. We're seeing that very strongly right now in the United States. There's a lot of trouble going on. Europe's the same, you know, not as much, but we have similar issues. So yeah, democracy is messy. China doesn't want democracy. And, you know, very obviously in 2013, on the 100th anniversary of the Western Returned Students Association, which is a driver of a lot of this knowledge and technology extraction, spotting and extraction and bringing back to China, is of course being a part of the United Front, a very core part of the United Front. You know, Xi Jinping in 2013 talked about the way that China wants to make a better, what he called better democracy than the West. And it was going to do this through technological extraction. So I really can't emphasize enough the degree to which technology is the core of the competition really between China and the US, or China and the West. And it's where the party sees China winning, if you like. That really just makes this all the more important as a topic. But just to try and, you know, there isn't much time to talk, and I'm happy to take any questions later on, but to just move through it relatively quickly, in the book we have the initial chapter by Bill Hannes, my colleague, whom I first came across in 2013. Again, this was really 7 years ago when I started to pay attention to all this. And if there's any way to show that thing now, Katerina, that article that I did when I was working at the New York Times in China about how this process of technology extraction works. Basically, you know, a local embassy in Berlin told in 2013, reaches out to the Chinese Students and Scholar Associations in Germany, of which there are 88, reaches out to the one in Berlin and says, you've got to write a letter to Xi Jinping, and then Xi Jinping writes back and says, wonderful, they reached out to me, sending New Year's greetings, work for the motherland, focus on your skills and talents, you are like the morning sun, this is a Maoist phrase, repay the motherland, all these phrases that we hear when we read Chinese in the original and are sensitive to what these things mean. Loyal overseas Chinese repay the country with intellect. Yeah, or serve the country, repay the ancestral country, don't forget your beginning, keep the mission in mind, gather talent from all over the world and use it for China. These are the phrases that just get thrown at students and professionals of Chinese origin all the time around the world, and the party is right behind right behind them. So, you know, initially this program, what happened? 1949, well, it began with leaning towards the Soviet Union, which was called 一边倒. Thank you very much, Katerina. There's the story. Wonderful. Thanks so much. You know, it's nice to see it there because the dateline there, 2014, shows that I've been working on this for about 6-7 years. And in fact, the speech I just mentioned from the Western Return Students Association was, of course, in 2013, because that's the 100th anniversary of the founding of the Western Return Students Association, 欧美学会, which is so vital in this United Front technology extraction activity and the control over students that the party exercises overseas to get the technology. And, you know, in that story, I detailed exactly what happened, how a letter from, if you could go back up, Katerina, to the first page, please. Thank you. A letter from, you know, she addresses the Western Return Scholars Association. And then the next thing is that, you know, suddenly a letter comes from the Berlin Student Scholar Associations delivered to the Chinese embassy in Berlin late at night on the same day. Yeah, so it's a great sense of urgency and drama. And then the message comes, if you can go down to the second page, Katerina, is that possible? Can you go down to the second page on this? You're right. And then the message comes from Xi Jinping via, of course, the Chinese ambassador in Germany, Shi Mingde. Ultimately, the message is, where did I have it there? Very funny, actually, in a sense. The General Secretary's letter calling on them to adhere to patriotism, adhere to ideals, adhere to learning, adhere to innovation, serve the motherland. Okay. And the students in Germany, you know, saying, looking at the General Secretary's letter, I feel extremely heartened, wish even more deeply to meet the expectations of the General Secretary in the motherland. My father and mother were also very moved. So there you get it, all the emotional pressure, the implications, the ties to the family, the cultural roots, this sort of incredible sense of belonging and pressure to belong that the party exercises over Chinese in order to stop them assimilating fully in their new host country and to become something else, you know, incredibly important, these emotional cultural appeals. And those of us who study it are very familiar with them. So that's the story. It was published in January 2014. It came from that October 2013 speech by Xi Jinping, and that was the whole system. And the analysis in there shows how it worked. You know, as my source said, the skids are greased for another year of technology transfer, and this is happening every Chinese New Year, from China to overseas, from overseas back to China. So initially, you know, 一边倒, they learned from the Soviet Union, and then China and the Soviet Union fell apart. By 1956, the Communist Party, building off their extraordinary intelligence capabilities, which were forged during, of course, the Civil War and early decades of communism, molded by the Russians, by the Germans too, had created a world-class document procurement system, spotting documentation technology overseas, bringing it back to China, getting copies, bringing them back to China. By the 1980s, we had the beginning, with Deng Xiaoping, we had the beginning of the mobilization of diaspora networks and the establishment of professional support associations overseas. The book shows that by 2013, there were 300 technology conversion enclaves back in China. By 2019, that number had grown to 2,000. In 2013, there were 60 science and technology professional organizations globally that could be identified. By 2019, there were 200. Currently in Europe, which is chapter 7 in this book, we have the figure of, if I'm not mistaken, that there are 95 such organizations, 95 Chinese professional associations across Europe in engineering, technology, chemistry, whatever you want, physics, mathematics, biology, computers, which we've called guilds, that connect into talent plans, send the stuff back to China. 47 of these guilds in Europe state specifically that they're involved in transferring technology back to China. And we estimate that at least 25,500 students and scholars and professionals in Europe are involved in these networks, and they go from Ireland to, well, of course, to Ukraine, if you like, but let's just say Poland for now, we're talking EU, Sweden down to Greece, and there's examples in the book, and the Europe section, the Germany section of a very big association in Greece that spots for military technology set up by Li Keqiang, asked for it to be set up in 2014. Again, as we say in the introduction, none of this is secret. You just have to look. And you have to be prepared to do the incredibly dull work, frankly, sometimes, of trying to pin it all down. And this gets back to Olga and Martin's very important points about the necessity of seeing things from the inside out, of working in the original Chinese source, of be culturally aware, of having the ethnographic knowledge. And I think, one thing that I have been hearing in Europe since I arrived here in 2017 from people was like, we have to understand China from the inside out. And generally what this means, almost inevitably, is that we should somehow just sympathize and say, well, they're just like us really, etc., blah, 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 and simply ignore the Communist Party and what it's actually doing. That, of course, is the wrong way to see China from the inside out. To actually see China from the inside out, you need to, above all, understand, of course, the party and the culture and the realities of the system. So I would say that there are two very different interpretations of that. Look, I won't go on. There is a lot in this book, and but I wanted to mention one issue that's very close to my heart, because what I see now today in the US is a growing awareness of this problem, still stunning ignorance as well, but also some awareness. Every day the FBI opens 2 cases related to China. Many of them have to do with technology transfer, which has been carried out by very, very large networks in the US as well. Now in Europe, we are far behind. And we're not just far behind in terms of awareness, but we're also apparently incapable of applying any law enforcement to this problem. So in our conclusion, we have a lot of suggestions that were gained from talking to a lot of experts. And I wanted to talk about 3 penalties that we've suggested, because I think the time for action has long passed. We really should be doing a heck of a lot more. One of them was that we need to replace the indiscriminate tariffs that the US government, and potentially Europeans, I suppose, although I doubt that'll happen, are imposing on China with targeted sanctions, targeted on companies directly involved in technology misappropriation. I think this is a smart move. Blacklist entities that seek critical host country technologies. The second major point, identify United Front-linked organizations and personnel engaged in talent co-option or foreign influence operations, monitor their activities, expose their links publicly, very important, and if necessary, criminalize the behavior as state-sponsored adversarial acts. Now, this is just kind of logical, actually, because, at the end of the day, this is a foreign government. It's the Communist Party of China that is organizing and pulling the strings behind a lot of this behavior. Third point, broaden the scope of the Foreign Agents Registration Act, FARA, to include technical guilds, talent co-optees, that's a whole other section that we deal with in the book, and foreign transfer intermediaries serving foreign states. Bring in screening and identification mechanisms of these where they do not exist, such as in Europe. Again, pretty obvious stuff. Law enforcement. The problem we have in Europe is that this kind of law enforcement activity is extremely difficult to bring in. Member states don't want to do it. EU organizations are dependent on member states or weak. So I'll just wrap it up there. There's really far too much to talk about. I've got a lot of yellow post-it notes here that I wanted to mention, but I'll just leave it at that. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the presentation of your book. We are looking forward to getting here to Prague as well. And now I will pass the virtual microphone to Philip. Philip, I can see you that you are ready, so please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'll be basically touching upon everything that's already been said, specifically on the Czech case. And if everything works fine, I might even share the presentation I prepared. Let's see. All right. Can you see it?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, great. So basically, this comes as, let's say, a year-long research where we and the Czech Radio looked into how the Czech academia is cooperating with Chinese entities, especially universities that have been flagged as risky or generally defense-linked by ASPIS research, mainly the China Universities, China Defense Universities Tracker, published last November, and then somewhat more what Alex has published recently, the Hunting the Phoenix report on talent recruitment, which is actually something that we already looked into a little bit, but that will still be actually coming up in a couple of few months, I guess. So the general issue is that that basically, as probably in many other European countries, which is something that Didi would know a bit more, and she's already touched upon it. Also in the Czech Republic, there's basically almost no awareness, or has been almost no awareness of the risks that actually come from cooperating with PRC entities, both from basically the political system and their close connection, often undisclosed, to defense research or even industry. So basically, Czech universities and also private companies and other institutions engaged in academic exchange basically treat PRC universities and other organizations as if they were standard sort of Western democratic kind of system bodies, but that's obviously completely not the case, as there's almost no academic freedom in China, and also because of the issue how it's often really complicated to distinguish where civil and military ends because of civil ends and military start, because of what Audrey described as she explained in her presentation on the military-civilian fusion. The other issue that we've encountered is sort of this kind of idea that I would describe as self-deprecation, in the sense that lots of the Czech individuals and organizations we've contacted throughout the research and the survey have basically expressed view that the Czech Republic is completely small and that it's not interesting when it comes to research output. And that's simply why would the PRC military, or generally the defense, the military industrial complex, would be interested in Czech technology. Where on the other hand, when we actually looked into it, we've seen that it's completely opposite, and that actually there's several declarations and several key and very, I would say, obvious evidence of PRC being interested in our technology, especially in the later years, nanotechnology, material science, drones, and robotics, where some of the departments, some of the universities are actually excelling even in international sort of standards. This, for example, has been underlined by cyber attacks that have been tracked back to China, that have been targeting universities, and very precise sort of cyber attacks. And they were also basically trying to obtain know-how in the same fields that PRC has been openly declaring is interested in the Czech Republic. There's also been a case that I will sort of detail a bit more, of copying a specific item of military technology. And there was also another attempted technological theft by an entity that's actually engaged in developing and producing the nuclear warheads in China. Alex has already talked about how the talent recruitment is linked or sort of intertwined with general united front work, and that's also the case of the two talent recruitment stations that he has identified in his research. And when we actually looked into what the entities are and what they have been doing, it's pretty clear that both the entities are actually involved in united front work. One of them is actually the Chinese Scholars and Students Association, which is sort of a general United Front organization that focuses on sort of organizing and to some degree even monitoring Chinese students abroad, and they're one of the two recruitment stations that are operating here. And there's been generally, I think for the last 2 years, there have been warnings from the Czech counterintelligence agency, BIS, that the Czech scholars and academia in general are being targeted by both recruiting and general sort of influence work, of which we've seen several cases when it comes to especially propaganda efforts, but when it comes to actual let's say technical research, there has been a case in the past that I will also present in a bit. So to sort of explain more what we really did, I basically compared the database called the China Defense Universities Tracker that's written by ASPI, put together by ASPI, and I compared it with the Czech Ministry of Education's list of Czech PRS University cooperation. But just to clarify, we're talking about Czech public universities because the data for private universities is basically non-available, even though that the cooperation is there. And then after pairing up and sort of marking down what the cooperation is, where the risks are, and what's the interesting sort of more prominent cases and examples of cooperation, we partnered up with the Czech radio, specifically Anna Magdoňová and Markéta Chalupská, who then basically helped us get more details about the cooperation, and then also in the third step confront the universities and the actors involved so that we get some response, so that they get space to explain their own views and basically sort of show and what the awareness is, what their reactions would be. And most of them were kind of receptive. Some of them were completely dismissive of any issues, and some of them outright refused to talk to us. But in general, I think we kind of did manage to raise some awareness of this issue. And well, some of the universities claimed that they would actually use the tracker to vet their Chinese partners in the future. But well, that remains to be seen. As for the general overview of what the cooperation between Czech universities and their Chinese partners looks like, there's no evidence of the universities in China that are linked more closely to security or military apparatuses with Czech public universities, meaning that the most problematic cooperation, at least per definition, is not at least established here. I'm not saying that they're not active here at all, but there's no MOU signed or any projects that would have to actually be in the Ministry of Education's database. On the other hand, 14 out of the 26 public universities have established cooperation with what the ASPI database describes as medium to very high risk Chinese civilian universities. Specifically, seven Czech universities have partnerships with very high risk partners, including already mentioned Beijing Institute of Technology, Beijing University, and the Northwestern Polytechnic Universities, all of them part of the 7 Sons of National Defense, meaning the universities that most engage and whose budgets on defense research is larger than some of countries worldwide. And we've also seen that these risky cooperations have mostly been established at technical schools, showing the clear sort of strategy of getting engineering and more the sort of more hard science sort of outputs and tech, possibly transferring that technology back to China. And with one exception, which is the Politických University in Olomouc, where the cooperation is much more prominent and much larger in scope than any other of the general universities, such as our own Charles University. And the explanation at hand is that basically that university is very closely linked with the propaganda and education system of the PRC, specifically through the presence of, I would say, the most established and most productive Confucius Institute in the country. And also, for example, their past translation of Xi Jinping's book on governance, which I might say, might have to add, is basically a completely non-critical translation of the book, meaning that it's basically pure propaganda, so to say. A more clear example of actual sort of interest in something that's more clearly linked to the military itself is this wonderful radar device. This is the YLC-20 passive radar system, which was developed in China in around 2006. The technology is mostly based on the Vera, the Czech Vera passive radar system, which China was showing clear interest in. They actually wanted to buy the technology back in 2004, but after, let's say, U.S. intervention, the Czech government actually stopped it. But in the end, it seems that either China has used some of the documents already procured during the negotiations to sort of re-engineer technology, or they actually copied another sort of different version of the technology that they procured from Ukraine, where I guess the U.S. influence did not really reach any substantial sort of level. And the other case that we also know of that sort of linked, again, more closely to the military is also from 2004, when, according to the Czech counterintelligence agency already mentioned, a certain Chinese student at a certain university in the country tried to steal a kind of nanotechnology, and also tried to sort of mediate a recruitment of a Czech scientist by the Chinese Academy of Engineering Physics, which is an entity that develops and produces Chinese nuclear warheads, among other things. So there's even clear interest in Czech military and other sort of important technology for these entities to get involved. As for some of the more current, let's say, case studies of how the lack of awareness sort of leads to very problematic cooperation, is the Sustainable Process Integration Laboratory at Brno University of Technology, which is led by a highly praised and highly awarded, internationally renowned Professor Jiří Klemeš. This laboratory mainly engages in energy industry engineering, and has partnered up with several Chinese entities that were labeled by the tracker as medium to very high risk, including the Xi'an Jiaotong University, which actually has several national defense laboratories. And that university is where Mr. Tu Zhuguo is actually based at. Mr. Tu is a long-time collaborator of Professor Klemeš, and he's been during the last, I would say, 1 or 2 decades, have been involved in several TAN plans in China, and also worked on several projects for national defense. Sadly, the details of that are really not not plenty, so we don't really know what those were, but we know that Mr. Chu is engaged in the field of astronautics and aeronautics, so probably something to do with aviation. And also he's worked for the China General Nuclear Power Group, because he also engages in nuclear research, and a company that you probably all know, ZTE. When Professor Klemisch was actually confronted with our research and our results, he showed absolutely no concerns, claiming that the Czech Republic is too tiny to be of any interest to the PRC defense industry, and saying that all they've been doing there is helping the mankind, which may be completely so, but at the same time, if you consider the military-civil fusion, and how China has been in the last couple of years focusing on basically taking any technology and trying to turn it and trying to make it dual use, then there might be actually issues that coming from that specific collaboration that even Professor Klemisch might not be aware of. Another very interesting sort of whole field is the long term is the aviation industry, where PRC has shown really long-term interest in all kinds of manner, especially engineering and training, the technology in general. I mean, Czech Republic, I guess, mainly used to have a pretty good aviation industry, and is still, for example, now focusing on drones, etc. From what we've seen, there has been pilot training cooperation, also, at least described as completely civil. That's between the Czech Technical University, ČVUT, and China Aviation Tianhe Education Investment Company, which is an entity that is very closely linked to the Peking Institute of Technology, also other universities, or also universities and even middle schools that focus on aviation science, national defense research, and generally training pilots, and also has participated in several events where the PRC Air Force was present. While there is this sort of academic cooperation overarching, we do have the entity has mostly been involved in this specific cooperation is a private entity called FAIR, which actually has very recently complained about the Czech Senate Speaker's visit to Taiwan, claiming that it's actually cost them business, because at this point, after 4 years of cooperation, the Chinese clientele is now basically worth 60% of their income, which is several millions of US dollars, showing again how the dependence on Chinese business partners can be problematic and can translate into actual politics, even on our side. Czech Technical University also is cooperating with the Chinese Society of Aeronautics and Astronautics, which often organizes defense-themed events for students and scholars, including recruitment events with the PRC Air Force. And this entity and its partners have been sending students to study in the Czech Republic, at least according to your reports. So again, whilst this is all presented as civilian and nothing to do with security or military, it's pretty clear that the entities that are involved on the Chinese side actually have links to the military, and that makes it problematic and something that the Czech partners should be aware of and try to actually make sure that it is indeed just purely civilian. As the sort of results of the survey showed, most universities showed complete lack of awareness of the issues. Some of them even attested to basically signing MOUs with their Chinese partners without even reading the actual document because the document was in Chinese. On the other hand, some of the universities already acted upon this and actually canceled some of the cooperation with the risky partners. Some said they would use it in the future, whilst, for example, the Technical University of Ostrava refused to comment or even respond at all when asked about their problematic cooperation, specifically specifically through their Czech China Center, where they're actually participating in a talent program in China, probably through a certain person. So in conclusion, it's pretty clear that even a small country such as the Czech Republic can be of interest to Chinese quest for technology, especially in niche fields such as nanotech, drones, and other material science. And the universities simply just need to get their act together and actively vet their partners, do their due diligence, and don't just rely on the security apparatus to do their job for them. So thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Philip, and thank you to all our speakers. And now we have still 40 minutes for questions. We already got few through our chat. Please, if there is more, write them to our chat or via Facebook chat as well. The first one is for Didi. So Didi, let me read the question for you. The question is about does sharing the fruits of free thoughts in the universities and the democratic world with an authoritarian state violate the principles if it strengthens the political power of the communist regime? That's the question. Didi, please, if you can answer.
Yeah. I mean, right now, that's certainly what's happening. And the reason is that we are not aware of what's going on. We're not monitoring it. We're not managing it properly, responsibly. Obviously, we can't and don't want to keep out Chinese students. I think that would be a great fail on our part, on the part of open societies. But we need to look at what they're studying, what collaborations are being signed by universities, by research institutes, even by companies. Who are the partners? You know, there needs to be a great deal more awareness of who's doing what, where, when, how, and why. And this is simply a body of knowledge and ultimately law enforcement too, and also legal reactions, for example, that we need to build up. So I've been tracking a lot of the stuff in Germany for a while now. And, you know, one thing that the great group here that organizes the professionals who, you know, begin the talent pipeline in the Chinese Student Scholar Associations and then go on and work with one of the leading German institutes, such as the ones developing the new lasers up in Hamburg at XFEL, or the guys in Switzerland who are at CERN, you know, that, or say Heidelberg, where we have basically entire laboratories where most of the researchers are from China now. Now, this is a question of responsibility for the institution and organizers, for the people who run these institutions. And in my experience, they are completely unaware or in denial and don't want to know, don't want to face the realities of the sort of political system behind these individuals, and just want to pretend like it's all nice, democratic open house style sharing, which of course works in a narrow Western European or European context, but is really incredibly ignorant when it comes to dealing with China and the Communist Party. So no, I mean, we can't keep people out, but we do need to manage where they go, what they do, what they work on. And we need to be aware of all the organizations, the professional associations, the Federation of Chinese Professional Associations in Europe, and how they organize technology transfer, competitions, talent spotting, etc. That FCPAE, the Federation of Chinese Professional Associations in Europe, which does so much of this work here in Europe, is headquartered in Frankfurt. I've been there. It's like a cutout. It's like a fake premise. They register as a charity, and they state in their zhangchang, in their constitution, if you like, that they are a non-political organization, and they do that to get charitable status in Germany. Now, this is of course inaccurate because they are a political organization. They carry out their aims and they represent the interests of the Communist Party of China. We must be absolutely clear about that. We need to force them to deregister and re-register as a political organization and simply be transparent and clear about where they take orders from and in what interests they agitate. They work, they push, they plan, they organize, because the FCPAE holds events all over Europe. They had one in Helsinki, the last one was in Dublin, and they invite very senior United Front leaders from Beijing to come to these events, who then liaise with the embassy and liaise with all the students and make all these patriotic emotional appeals. And when you're talking about Germany, for example, you're talking about one of the major venues of technology extraction in the world. We've got really high level, massive programs going on here that we wrote a chapter about that in the book. And it's really like fishing in a trout farm. You just start looking and bang, it's all there. There is so much fish coming out, once you start looking. So long answer to your question, which is, no, we just need to get a lot smarter about who comes and what they do and how we deal with them.
Thank you, Didi. Professor Lomova would like to add something. So, Professor, the floor is yours.
Yeah. I just wanted to do a brief remark, which is actually a follow-up of what Didi said. I think what we lack and what's the basis for any future successful tackling of these problems is a sort of self-reflection, understanding the basic issues of political systems, and simply Chinese political system is not just one option of many other excellent political systems or better or worse political systems, but it is an anti-system system in terms of our European environment. And we should be more self-confident. I always think about Xi Jinping's campaign started a few years ago, 四个自信, 4 self-confidences. And among the self-confidences, prominence is in self-confidence of being a socialist country based on the ideas of Marxism-Leninism. So we should also build self-confidence and be aware that the political system in China actually breaks and has no scruples, doesn't care about any existing rules, sort of good faith, etc., because it is this very type of a political system. So this is, the duty of people who understand the political system of China to bring awareness to this. It is not just that some people may believe that democracy has also a lot of problems, and here we are having this socialism, which is, after all, for many people, a very positive word. And we should really explain and make people aware of what kind of partner we are dealing with and how much we can trust this partner. And another level or another problem which we should be aware, I think Martin in his opening remark mentioned corporate greed And I would mention university or academic greed. And this greed is very often also caused by financing, and universities generally never have too much money and will be never satisfied with more and more money, because this is what is needed for developing good programs and research and so on and so on. And since the Chinese are interested in very specific topics and very specific fields, just as we are talking about it now, the experts just don't think about the political consequences. They think about the opportunities. They are delighted to be able to serve the mankind, as we heard from Philip Yerosh's presentation, or simply just to have an opportunity to do their research. And some may be even very happy to get some extra money. So I think these two things have to be taken into consideration and have to be openly discussed, because if we don't openly discuss this with broader public, we will get into trouble. We are actually already in a big trouble.
Yes. Thank you very much, Professor Loma. Didi, do you want to add something?
Yeah, no, I completely agree, Olga. And in fact, there is a little bit of discussion starting up about how to manage this problem of returning maybe academic values and financing to universities, for example, rather than the business model, which has dominated for some decades now. But you know, I mean, in Germany, you know, the government is still highly involved in the universities and funds them very heavily. And of course, we still have this problem here, and you know, it's tied to the size of the German economy and also to the German stance in Europe, which has for a long time now been to put Germany first in Europe, and often to the detriment of the European neighbours. And there's a little bit of recognition and even embarrassment, I think, growing about that now here in Germany at the very top. But it's going to, you know, take a real examination of our capitalist systems as well, in order to analyze and properly deal with this problem, as you say, because the money is the reason for so much of this collaboration. Anyway, just thank you.
Thank you, Didi. Actually, there is one more question to you and Audrey as well. So let me read it from our chat. But again, I would like to ask all of you, if you have questions to our speakers, please write them to our chat or use our Facebook, where you can post them under our broadcasting. So this question to Didi and Audrey is from Frank Uris. He said, "Thank you, Didi and Audrey, for enlightening presentations. Could you please elaborate on the awareness of issues mentioned among policymakers? For example, potential risks of foreign funding to China, capabilities building under the European Union's Horizon program." So I don't know if you can start. And I'm not sure if Audrey is still there. Yes, still have Audrey. So please, Didi, if you can start, and then I'll ask Audrey to.
Okay, if you like it that way around, that's great. Frank, yeah, we Horizon 2020, Horizon Europe. Yeah, there's this whole section in this book. My apologies for constantly referring to it, but there's good reason. It's all in there. There's a whole section about the EU funding. Now, my experience of doing that reporting, because those are the sections, I was responsible for those sections, as well as others, was that it was extremely difficult to get a straight answer from the EU, either in Brussels or in Beijing. It literally took about 3 months, maybe even 4 months, before I was finally able to figure out exactly how much money I think they were putting in, where, what was going on, what was the phase of this agreement, what was in it, what wasn't. Fairly basic questions, actually, considering that this was EU money, taxpayers' money. And my overriding sense, to be honest with you, was that they are aware of the dilemma that they are currently in with China, but they have made deep commitments in the science and technology sphere. And indeed, the European Union continues to collaborate with China on nuclear research, for example. and you know that there's a lot of vested interest, there's a lot of jobs, there's a lot of reputations, there's a lot of legacies involved here. They are very reluctant to disengage. The EU export control regime of sensitive technologies, which is anyway kind of ridiculous when you consider military-civilian fusion scheme, but they still cling on to this fig leaf that there's a difference between military and civilian use. But the regimes themselves are completely full of holes, are very inadequate, shall we say. So yeah, you know, I mean, I literally, there was a meeting in December 2019 of top EU sort of universities and officials, science and technology officials who deal with China research, joint research. And we asked, myself and my co-editor Hinak Feldfisch-Trentrup, we asked for some information about the meeting under EU freedom of information rules, and were rejected twice on the grounds that disclosing what had been discussed at this meeting about how to handle scientific cooperation with China moving forward would damage international relations with the People's Republic of China. So there you go. EU, not so democratic, frankly, and certainly not very open. That was, for me, quite a shock. So I'm critical of the willingness to be open about the state of science and technology cooperation between the EU and China. I think the EU is protecting itself. I think it's protecting its interests. I think there's a lot going on that should be stopped.
Thank you very much, Didi. And now I would like to ask Audrey to answer to this question.
Yes. Yeah, so I am based in the US, so I can speak a bit more to sort of the US approach to universities and sort of knowledge about military civil fusion. And so I think that more recently, there's definitely been, under the Trump administration, there's been a move to sort of focus on military civil fusion. So it's definitely now something that people in the administration are perhaps not understanding necessarily, but they're taking more actions than are being taken in other countries. But I think largely it has taken a fairly long time to sort of raise awareness on this issue. And I had started researching military civil fusion about 2 years ago, and it was something that not many people were talking about or taking actions on. But there's definitely the same sort of apprehension of universities towards sort of the military civil fusion strategy and addressing these issues that are associated with it. And so the FBI, there are new cases that they're sort of looking into the universities and these affiliations with the CCP and the military. But it's a very expansive issue, and so I think it's difficult to sort of find the fine line between continuing cooperation and being with and coming from the universities who don't really want to acknowledge these issues, and then also not having sort of like a flat out ban on people from being able to come to U.S. universities. But so it's definitely become something that is more broadly discussed in the U.S. at least. And so I think actions are beginning to be taken.
Thank you very much, Audrey. And there's one more question to you. There is Luke McWilliams asking, from next Monday, UK government will ask all incoming Chinese students to disclose military links. UK's academic technology approval scheme will be expanded to include advanced conventional military technology. How likely is this to be effective? How could Chinese military and military-linked university circumvent this? Please, Audrey, if you are still here.
Yes. Yeah. Definitely, I think it's a bit tricky to to be able to sort of identify these links with the PLA or Chinese military. And in sort of Alex's report for the China Defense Universities Tracker, we looked at some instances where people with military affiliations, sort of completely don't disclose any of that information, and they it just sort of remains anonymous. Their links to the PLA, and so I think in my experience, it's something that definitely requires extensive sort of research into being able to find sort of transparent sources that would declare this. And I can't speak quite as much to UK and the specific plan, which maybe Didi can, but I definitely think it is difficult to sort of be able to identify these affiliations, and it's definitely possible for them to continue not disclosing this information.
Thank you very much. If there is no more questions, Didi, please.
Yeah, just apropos that issue, it's very interesting that around the time the Houston consulate was shut down in the US for espionage, primarily technology transfer, including medical and energy related issues mostly, in July, the Department of State shut the Chinese consulate in Houston down. At the same time, about between 30 and 50 interviews were conducted across the US of researchers from China who were believed to have committed visa fraud by saying that they were engaged in, regular civilian style medical or scientific research, but in fact they were linked to PLA-tied institutions. And, you can research this, you can prove this. And you can manage the situation. And it's very interesting that they started to try to do that in the US. And I think it's very encouraging that they're starting to deal with this in the UK as well. I would only wish that the same thing would happen in Germany and in France and in other European countries.
Thank you. I will once more check all our chats, but I can't see any more questions. We have a few questions that Alex already answered via our chat because he already left our group. So if you sign up for our chat, you can go through and read these questions and answers. They are mostly about PLA and last Alex research. So please feel free. I'm not going to read them now, but if there are no more questions, I will ask you for 15 minutes or half-hour break. So it's the time for coffee, maybe for some of you lunch or dinner. And we will meet again at 4 p.m. CST. And we will start our second panel. It's actually called panel number 1. And it's about the CCP's human rights abuses and global responses. So please, if you have time, join us also for the second panel. Till that, see you later.
Thank you. See you.
So, hello again. We are going to continue our workshop, Mapping China's Footprint in the World, with the second panel called the CCP's Human Rights Abuses and Global Responses. So, hello everyone. Let me welcome and introduce our speakers. The first one is Kate Saunders, a researcher on Tibet, who is going to talk about new findings on Tibet and their impact on telling Tibet's story. Welcome, Kate. And the second speaker is Dr. Magnus Fiskesjö from Cornell University, who is going to talk about Chen Chuanguo and Reinhard Heydrich, parallel futures of communist Chinese and Nazi German genocidal and forced assimilation policies. Doctor, welcome as well. Wonderful, second speaker. And we are still looking for our third speaker, Andrea Worden, non-resident research fellow from Sinopsis, who is presenting or should be presenting the Beijing 2022 Winter Games, a threat to the Olympic ideal and human rights globally. Andrea, looking forward maybe to see you, yes, as well. So Kate, if you don't mind, I would ask you to start your presentation, and the structure is going to be similar as was during our first panel. We are going to have 15 minutes for each presentation, and then we are going to have 30 minutes up to 40 minutes for discussion. The question could be sent via chat for those who are registered online, or you can write them or send them on our Facebook page, Sinopsis. So pleasure having you here. I also already saw Andrea. So Andrea, welcome. And I will give a floor to Kate. So Kate, please.
Thank you so much. And can you hear me okay?
Perfect.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me here. And although we can't be in Prague, it's lovely to be here virtually with everybody. So I'm going to talk about Tibet and telling Tibet's story. Last month, the Communication University of China in Beijing hosted an online forum on telling stories of Tibet. And Global Times tells us it was attended by experts from China, from Nepal, from Japan, from even the UK and Germany. And the intention was to develop creative new methods of conveying the CCP's 21st century narrative on Tibet. The party's emphasis on telling the story of Tibet well has been emphasized consistently in state media, with the assertion in 2018 that propaganda thought and culture work on Tibet are at a new historic starting point. Telling the Tibet story is such an anodyne, seemingly harmless phrase, and in no way it conveys the depth and the extent of China's systemic efforts to not only silence Tibetans, but to erase their truth, to erase their agency through rewiring their thinking and belief systems. The real agenda is encapsulated far better with a phrase from an official document that applies to both Tibetans and Uyghurs, and giving the party's stated aim as breaking lineage, breaking roots, breaking connections, and breaking origins. It reflects the ideologically driven preoccupation in Beijing, bearing little or no relation, of course, to the situation on the ground, that the two major ethnic minority regions of the PRC present a grave and present danger to China's overall security. From the patriotic education campaigns of the mid-1990s onwards, the CCP has accelerated efforts to change Tibetan minds. And this is inextricably linked to the imperative of changing ours too, as China uses various means of covering up information, subversion and distortion of the conversation on Tibet globally. And this imperative was underlined by Xi Jinping at the 7th Tibet Work Forum in August, which dictates the policy cycle for the next 5 to 10 years. Reflecting Tibet's strategic and geopolitical importance to the Communist Party, Xi characterized Tibet as an impregnable fortress and emphasized a further constricting ideological agenda. It's probably worth mentioning here why Tibet is so important to China, as this informs its whole agenda. China's policies in Tibet emerge from the PRC's pressing strategic and economic imperatives, and these are its control over its borders, now prioritized still further in the deepening tensions with India, raising the productivity of the core industrial cities of Xi'an, Chongqing, and Chengdu at the foot of the plateau, the expansion of mining based on the rich resources of the Tibetan plateau that includes uranium, lithium, gold, copper, and that's in order to fuel China's economic development. Finally, to address the progressive scarcity of water shortages in the north and northeast of China, with water sourced in Tibet. That one's very important, of course. This combination of factors renders Tibet vital to the future of China in Tibet. Xi Jinping's leadership has presided over intensified militarization, disproportionate securitization, and massive social engineering campaigns notably the displacement and relocation of Tibetans, particularly nomads and herders. And the Chinese Communist Party makes its intentions of attempted control over Tibet's past, present, and future clear when it references even the concept, the phrase that's emerged in Chinese, the post-Dalai Lama era. So underlining these imperatives, three top political leaders, Wang Yi, Wang Yang, and Hu Chunhua, visited the plateau in the summer, and that indicated the high-level engagement on the plateau at the time of the work forum, which was held on August 28th and 29th. The visit of Wang Yi to Tibet's border areas came just prior to his visit to Europe in August, where he bumped elbows with Macron and amplified China's disinformation efforts on the origins of coronavirus. And Wang Yi's visit to Tibet was in the context of ongoing tensions with India. He's the special representative in border talks with India. And he's upholding a mantra of Xi Jinping that the security and stability of the PRC is dependent upon the so-called security and stability of its peripheries, of its borders. And in Tibet, we've seen that China has accelerated construction of what it calls well-off border defense villages, in which it's part of the CCP's far-reaching agenda to create an advanced and impenetrable security barrier between Tibet and the outside world. That was something, again, that was emphasized in the 7th Work Forum. And CCP cadres are stationed in these new villages with the aim of countering infiltration by hostile forces, and that includes Tibetans loyal to the Dalai Lama, for example, and generally ensuring compliance with CCP objectives. So crucial to China's new telling of Tibet's story are two equally bland phrases concealing the glint of the knife: ethnic unity and Sinicization. And the Chinese author Zhang Shanlang wrote in his Cultural Revolution Labour Camp memoir Grass Soup that thought reform was equivalent to using a wooden knife to kill a man. He said such a knife was aimed not at a man's throat, chest, or stomach. Instead, it attacked the invisible world around him, the invisible feelings that tied him to the world around him. A wooden knife could not enter a man's flesh, but it was plenty sharp enough to cut immaterial things. So the adoption of ethnic unity regulations in January are a legal articulation of long-held policy goals that seek to reduce ethnic differences, erase distinctive identities, and achieve a stable, Han-centric society. Taken together with the aim of Sinicizing Tibetan Buddhism, a 5-year program that began last year, the regulations also reflect the culmination of Xi's policy focus to consolidate power in the party and to eliminate threats. And that includes existential ones, such as the Dalai Lama. It's the idea, the political idea of I live, you die. And this reflects a policy arc informed by a number of influential Chinese figures such as Huang Gang and Ma Rong, and they're known as the architects of the CCP's position on so-called ethnic minorities aimed at enforced assimilation of Tibetan culture. And all of you at Sinopsis have documented this trend very well, along with scholars including James Leibold, James Millwood, and others. So the stakes could not be higher for the survival of Tibetan Buddhist civilization, which has been highly influential itself globally, as the 85-year-old 14th Dalai Lama ages. To fully understand this retelling of the story, we need to go back to 2008, when Beijing was preparing for a dazzling Olympics. And Tibetans then were acutely aware, of course, of the global spotlight on China, but much more deeply cognizant of another anniversary, the 10th of March 1959, the uprising, which led to the killing, torture, and imprisonment of thousands of Tibetans, and the escape into exile, of course, of their beloved leader, the Dalai Lama. So on March the 10th, 2008, a group of Drepung monks led a peaceful march to Lhasa, where they were surrounded by paramilitary police before being dispersed. It was one of hundreds of overwhelmingly peaceful protests happening across the plateau at that time and for months afterwards. And they involved Tibetans from every sector of society: nomads, monks, nuns, teachers, intellectuals, grandmothers, school children. The protests and the brutal crackdown that followed propelled Tibet to the top of the news agenda as Beijing prepared to host the Olympics. It was obviously a PR disaster for the CPC, and their first attempt to fix it dramatically backfired. They invited a group of Western Chinese correspondents to Lhasa a few weeks later with the aim of showing that the capital was back to normal after the rioting, smashing, looting, burning, as they described it. But instead, a group of Jokang monks confronted them and straight to camera told the journalists not to believe the lies that they were being told. It can be described as Tibet's first truthful press conference. So after March 2008, the Chinese government sought to ensure that nothing like this, that challenges their international image in Tibet, could happen again. And they engaged in a comprehensive cover-up of the torture, disappearances and killings that had happened on the plateau. They combined that with a propaganda offensive against the Dalai Lama, and on a global stage, they refused to answer legitimate questions from governments and about the use of lethal force against unarmed protesters or the welfare of individual Tibetan detainees. In addition, the CCP framed the hundreds of protests that had occurred, although they were overwhelmingly peaceful, as one violent riot. And even now, March 2008 is still depicted by some international media with this convenient shorthand that accords with the official line. A year later, in 2009, after the deaths and disappearances of untold Tibetans, we still don't know exactly how many, a monk called Tape walked out of his monastery in eastern Tibet in Amdo and set himself on fire. Tape survived, and he later had to endure the cruelty of being depicted terribly burnt in a propaganda video made to show that the Dalai Lama was the evil influence. And his action was followed by more than 150 self-immolations inside Tibet and 10 by Tibetans in exile. And in a letter written in the 1960s to Martin Luther King, the Vietnamese Thich Nhat Hanh observed about the Vietnamese monks who were setting themselves on fire at that time in a remark it could compare to the Tibetan monks. He said, "To burn oneself by fire is to prove that what one is saying is of the utmost importance. To say something while experiencing this kind of pain is to say it with utmost courage, frankness, determination, and sincerity. The importance is not to take one's life, but to burn. What he really aims at is the expression of his will and determination, and not death." Almost all of the Tibetans who set fire to themselves communicated a wish for the Dalai Lama to return home and for freedom. And although Chinese officials did seek to turn public opinion against them, their efforts were a complete failure. Thousands of Tibetans gathered to pray and pay their respects for those who self-immolated, and peaceful protests often followed too. It was a new political moment in Tibet, and it was a glaring counter to the claims of the CCP that they were improving Tibetan lives. The city of the gods, Lhasa, which is now remodeled into a hub of hyper-securitization and a glittering stage set for invited foreign diplomats, had been named as China's city with the happiest people for several years running. Aimed mostly at a domestic rather than an international audience, it had never seen such an empty claim. So before that time, before 2008 and 2009, Chinese officials had sought to protect the notion that only a handful of Tibetans, mostly monks and nuns, caused unrest in Tibet entirely due to the Dalai Lama's influence. And now many of them realized that their efforts of persuasion, the mass campaigns of patriotic education in the 1990s and beyond, had completely failed to ensure how they defined stability or to deeply touch the inner lives of Tibetans. And so it was decided that political education had to reach a new stage with a deeper reach in the war against successionist sabotage. The Chinese government sought to replace the loyalty to the Dalai Lama in Tibetan hearts and minds with allegiance to the Communist Party state, and in doing so, to literally obliterate memory and to break the roots and connections at the heart of Tibetan Buddhist beliefs and civilization. And a party cadre who was interviewed at the time by a Tibetan friend said that China had realized that without completely controlling Tibetan thinking and what he described as the consciousness sphere, the mission of achieving the desired long-term stability, which ultimately means complete compliance with the CCP, would be impossible. So this position reflected also the CCP's broader anxieties over Tibet. Tibet is not only regarded as a core issue of the PRC's territorial integrity, but also as a matter of national security. And there were further major shifts following the takeover of Chen Guangguo as TAR party secretary in 2011. Prior to the mass internment of the Uyghurs, and under the leadership of Chen Guangguo, now Xinjiang's party chief, and Marcus will be talking about him shortly, Tibet was used, of course, as a laboratory to implement oppressive new measures of surveillance, an iron grid system of securitization, and accelerated cultural assimilation. And these dystopian measures are shaping the Tibetan experience of reality. A Human Rights Watch report recently involved the reverse engineering of an app used for police surveillance, which many of you will have seen. And this report concluded that an examination of the list of research topics of the app, which applied to Xinjiang, suggests Chinese police are developing capabilities for the reality mining that go beyond existing forms of surveillance by studying how people interact, using data gathered by machines such as their mobile phones or checkpoints, an approach considered more accurate than existing subjective sources. The authorities seemingly hope to be able to understand in a more fine-grained way how people lead their lives, whom they talk to, and where they go and what they do. So the goal is apparently to identify patterns of and to predict the everyday life and resistance of its population, and ultimately to engineer and control reality. But the CCP knows that the human element is crucial in combination with new technological capabilities. And among other measures, a new structure of monastic management was imposed, requiring monasteries to be run not primarily by committees of monks, but by party officials. And critically, the transfer of thousands of party cadres to Tibet to work at grassroots level began, human to human, in some cases, as in Uyghur areas, with party cadres literally embedded in Tibetan homes and learning in granular detail about their lives and motivations. So to transform everything, as the Tibetan writer Wosa puts it, about the CCP's current efforts, you also have to study everything. And in this case, a story from a friend of mine who was imprisoned as a monk in the 1990s is very telling. He told me a story of a conversation he had with a prison official in Lhasa's notorious Drapchi jail, and this was in the late 1980s, and it was 2 years into his sentence, and he was summoned into the office of a senior Chinese prison official. And such invitations were generally greatly feared because they knew what would usually result. And my friend was frightened, but when he arrived, he was offered a cup of tea and a cigarette. an act that had never happened before. And he was invited to sit down and to talk for 2 hours. He said that this small act of kindness was so overwhelming that he completely dropped his guard. The official wanted to know various questions: why he had risked his life in protesting. Did he regret it? Did he still think that Tibetan independence was something worth fighting for? Why was a Tibetan prepared to risk so much for shouting simply "Long live the Dalai Lama" in the street? My friend was honest, and he said that even if the Chinese killed us, this still wouldn't solve the Tibetan problem with China, because Tibetans and Chinese have a totally different culture. They still believe passionately that Tibet should be independent. He also told him that the patriotic education system in prison was ridiculous. They were given the answers to specific questions. They asked the questions and then had to recite the answers. The prison official laughed. Maybe he even agreed. They spoke for 2 hours, and it was an encounter between two very different ways of thinking. But my friend later realized that this was a real indication of the granular detail that the Chinese officials in charge sought to gather. And they knew that in order to do so, they had to communicate as one human being to another. At that time, the CCP did not have the facilities, the infrastructure, the technological means, the personnel required to literally change the thinking of people. Now they do. And we're witnessing, of course, a much deeper evolution of strategies of control, of conversion, from the bedrock of thought reform techniques, which were developed in the 1950s and 60s, and that are documented in Robert J. Lifton's classic text on that. In the 12 years since those courageous monks at the Jokhang looked journalists in the eyes and told them the Chinese government is not telling the truth about Tibet, China has intensified its efforts to silence Tibetans and to prevent any news from reaching the outside world. Tibetans have been locked in effectively, and more people have been locked out. Prior to 2008, thousands of Tibetans were coming into exile, often to see the Dalai Lama for the only time in their lives. But last year, only 18 were able to do so. Any communication at all is much more difficult. There's already plenty documentation of the difficulties in communicating on WeChat and even on sensitive issues such as the environment. Space has been completely contracted. So at the same time, information from outside is totally blocked, and parameters for thought are developed at a very early age, from kindergarten, literally changing the way in which young Tibetans ask questions and steering them into predetermined channels. And at the 7th Work Forum in August, Xi Jinping stressed that patriotism, the party's view of it, should be incorporated into the whole process of education, right from the beginning of schooling. So this new political direction is compounded by a much more entrenched regulatory framework and a comprehensive system of policing of monasteries and nunneries. In addition, the CCP seeks to cultivate the red gene, particularly among young people in rural areas, and membership is required to progress in every sphere of society, as it is elsewhere in China. And importantly, this system inspires the kind of fear that suppresses awkward questions, as well as seeking to stop Tibetans from thinking them in the first place. How am I doing for time? I still have a few points.
Kate,
okay.
If you can finish in 2 minutes, it will be great. We have another 2 speakers, so sorry for it.
Oh, of course. Okay, so what I'll do is just make a few points about counter-influence, if I may. So thinking of Tibetans as transformers, as agents of change, as opposed to the victims of these measures. So firstly, just to mention that Dalai Lama has reshaped his role on the global stage. Unusually for a religious leader, he's influential in the field of secular ethics. He's also engaged in a dialogue with modern scientists in fields of cosmology, quantum physics, which has also gained him new secular platforms. He has his influence reaches into China, impacting Chinese Buddhists and cultivating a deep respect for Tibetan Buddhism. Many Chinese now have Tibetan religious teachers and have been impacted also by his teachings. As China steps up its efforts to control the Dalai Lama's succession, the Dalai Lama has neatly undercut Beijing's intensified efforts by suggesting that the process of reincarnate lamas and choosing them may have had its day because the hierarchy is linked to a feudal system. So, and the Dalai Lama's comments really expose the absurdity of the imposition of legislation by the CCP to install and manage official reincarnations. Now, current circumstances also remind us that it was not only the iron grid of preemptive policing and total surveillance that was trialled in Tibet. Teachings by the Dalai Lama, the Karmapa, and other religious leaders, particularly during the current pandemic, underline that well before that, Tibetans themselves trialled solitude, lockdown, and techniques to survive this that they have endured for far longer, underpinned by a core of teachings that have shaped Tibetan civilization. And this has given rise to a remarkable resilience. And while the crackdown in Tibet has intensified in scope and tactics, an alternate narrative of cultural resilience is most certainly taking shape in Tibet as Tibetans themselves take increasingly bold steps to defend and protect the core values of their language, their cultural and religious identity. And Tibetan historian Tsering Shakya writes of a Tibetan term meaning smile in the face, fire in the belly. And this Tibetan word most often used to describe the concept of resistance means literally to oppose or to stand against the face. And the term conjures an image of a person turning away from what is confronting them and conveys a refusal to acknowledge that confrontation. So while China's state media, in showing happily singing and dancing Tibetans and Uyghurs, and showing Lhasa as the happiest city, is aimed at showing this smile on the face, resistance can take many, many forms. And the fire in the belly is not always visible. And these acts of turning away or not giving face, implicit in the Tibetan term for resistance, are a refusal to recognize something that is not worth recognition, despite the demands of the all-powerful party state for demonstrations of submission and compliance. So I'll close there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kate. Now I would like to give our virtual floor to Dr. Fiscasio. I'm sorry if it's the wrong pronunciation. I'm trying my best. So please, if you can start with your presentation.
Thank you very much. I'm going to upload my PowerPoint here. I have some slides to show. My topic may seem slightly off from the panel topic, talking about global reactions to what China is doing. I'm digging into history, making a comparison between the genocide in Xinjiang and the Nazi genocide, particularly how that played out in Nazi-occupied Europe, where they were also forced assimilating people. And I want to make the argument that it is basically the same story, and we should realize this. Let's see, my pictures are apparently coming up. Can you see them?
They're loading right now. Yes, now it's fine.
Can you see it? Thank you. But I would also like to take a little bit of time to talk about their reactions. Actually, this will show up in my presentation as well. So should I go for 20 minutes or 15?
let's try 15. If you will need a few more minutes more, it's fine. But we have still third speaker waiting. So if you can make 15, would be great. Thank you.
I will try to. I will probably skip some things. So my main objective is to understand this genocide. In this slide, I've listed a few points about what is happening, what we know is happening. As you can see, it's a very sorry list. Our previous speaker, Kate, mentioned some of these goings on and the parallels with Tibet, where they seem to be also taking up the harsh measures and camps and so on that are being used in Xinjiang as part of what I argue is a genocide. And there is both domestic, although muzzled, criticism inside of China, and there's also international criticism. There is now also a few teams that are preparing genocide legal cases based on how these actions violate the existing genocide convention, and also how beyond that, the cultural erasure that the Chinese government is doing is violating commitments to protect cultural heritage as human rights. There is a strident Chinese propaganda counteroffensive, which involves intimidating Uyghurs, Kazakhs, and other native peoples of Xinjiang who are abroad. It involves mobilizing allies at the UN. It involves trying to invite journalists, gullible journalists and diplomats to see fake camps, which has partly been working. But I think that the tide has very much, in world opinion, turned against China on this. We have, above all, many personal testimonies from survivors, witnesses who have been there and seen what is happening. In terms of comparing what is happening to the Nazis, I realize this is a fraught issue. There's been a lot of debate over whether one can do this, and I certainly agree that one should not throw around the Nazi comparison in too light a manner. On the other hand, I take heart from those who argue that we should compare what is happening to the Holocaust, because if we do so in a thoughtful way, we may be issuing a call to action, alerting people that this is happening again, and we should not let it. So I want to compare these two men. I've been struck with how similar they are in their role. Chen Quanguo, whom Kate mentioned, is the Communist Party chief who was transferred from Tibet to Xinjiang, who is now overseeing these operations. And Reinhard Heydrich is one of the top Nazi leaders, one of the coordinators of the final solution on the Jewish question in Nazi parlance. He was also governor of annexed Czechia and had a role in planning and implementing the Germanization of occupied Europe. And this is where I see a key similarity, not just with the smaller minority of Jewish people, but with the larger populations of people that the Nazis would have to deal with. He was assassinated in 1942, so his projects were cut short. Nevertheless, I argue there are strong similarities. Let's see. Am I not allowed to switch slides anymore?
No. Yeah, we are stuck in that slide with the post why we should compare for some reason. Oh, no, it's working.
I could move it myself. I could move the pictures myself. Olga.
I will try.
It's working now.
Now it's perfect. You move it, so, or maybe Professor Romova move it, so.
Yeah.
Obviously.
But
I can move it for you if you want.
I would prefer to try myself.
Okay.
So one point is that these men are not the leaders. They are the people carrying out the orders from above. And that, I think, goes for both Chen Quanguo and Reinhard Heydrich. Heydrich was very much, when he was assassinated, in the midst of preparing and starting to implement these Germanizing plans in Czechia. And again, it was not his personally developed concept, but something that he received as a project to carry out. The Wannsee Conference is a famous event that was led by Heydrich, and I think is often misunderstood as if it devised the master plan. As I see it, they were expanding existing measures, and Heydrich was at best a creative coordinator and someone who expanded on those measures, but he was not the one who inaugurated them. Here he is listening to an outline of the general plan for occupied Europe, and this is where he gets his ideas. So the Nazi plan, of course, was to purify Germany and then expand the Lebensraum and then go on to dominate the world. And his own goals, that were very similar to Chen Quanguo's in Xinjiang, but cut short, was first the classification of targeted populations, mainly distinguishing those that could be Germanized or re-Germanized, as they would say. Having come under bad influence, they had turned into something else. Now they would have to be re-Germanized because they were of good enough of racial stock. And then the non-Germanizables, which would have to be dealt with. And the way he set about this was to decapitate the Czech intelligentsia, curbing the resistance, but also to make it impossible for this nation to exist, or this people to exist. And then he was also starting on accelerating, forcing Germanization. The non-Germanizables he would exterminate, maybe expel, maybe exterminate. And the entire territory would be taken over, with population replaced, architecture and culture rebuilt, and so on. All of these I find very close to what's happening in Xinjiang. It's also interesting to compare how these actions were justified as scientifically based. In Heydrich's case, he even sought aid from an anthropologist who was complicit in this. There's a lot of material on how he imagined this classification to proceed, and it's still partly opaque, but very interesting to look at. The cultural genocidal measures that were taken are also very interesting to compare. So although these aspects are not included in the UN Genocide Convention, they were certainly conceived as such by the convention's father, Raphael Lemkin. And after the war, in that debate, when Lemkin was pushing for the convention to be adopted, the Czechoslovak representative spoke to this, and how Heydrich and the Nazi regime had designed the destruction of Czech and Slovak culture to destroy everything that might remind them that they had such a past. And this is very much resonating with what's happening in Xinjiang. Here we have Mr. Chen Quanguo in Lhasa, actually. His perhaps most interesting point of fact in his resume is that he was for a while back in his own province of Henan in the late 1990s when Falun Gong had been made illegal. And he was picking up on methods for arresting them and force reconverting them to normal people, so that to take the Falun Gong faith out of them through torture and pressure and through these measures that they are now using in the camps with the Uyghur detainees. It's something that he's reapplying. I have a few words on the plan that the Chinese Communist Party has, which uses different vocabulary, but I still think that it's quite similar to this Nazi idea. It's a rejuvenation of the great Chinese nation, which is sort of reasserting its rightful place in the world. And at home, it's about what Kate Sanders already mentioned, ethnic unity and then amalgamation of the peoples that live there, which I think are code words for forced assimilation. When we look back at the history, after 1949, the communists adopted a Soviet system, basically. Then they have drifted away from communist ideas, the critique of empire. We've had the ultra-nationalists that Kate also mentioned that gained the confidence of the party, and they are the ones that have now formulated the ideology behind the forced assimilation policies that we see carried out by the Chinese Heydrich, Mr. Chen Jianguo. The new, I think, policy since circa 2017, when this has become intensified, is to purify the nation, perhaps abolish the ethnics, to not recognize them as existing anymore, only have Chinese people in China and no minorities, and in particular in Xinjiang to consolidate that area and take it over. The main means that they are using are very similar to what we just heard about. The differences are in the high-tech means that they have, and also I should mention the formulation of the program is not in racist terms as the Nazis, but more in the nationalist terms, although I do think that racism is also behind it, but can't be overt because there's still a commitment to this existing ethnopolitics framework. And the system that Chen Jianguo has set up turns on trust. And this is very interesting. You can be trustworthy, that's usually the Han Chinese, or maybe a few Uyghurs. You can be average, that's possibly untrustworthy. And if you are someone that openly is proud or defiant, then you can be sent to these camps. And there's, as you know, long lists for all kinds of infringements, owning a Quran, having been abroad, making a phone call abroad, having a relative abroad, those kinds of things make you untrustworthy. And this is actually applied very broadly. Many people have been revealed in Chinese documents that have been arrested for unspecified, not even detailed, specified untrustworthiness, or even by quota. And Chen himself said, seize all that should be seized, which implies that there's this already existing idea among the Han settlers that the Uyghurs are untrustworthy, we better get rid of them. And I think it's in that spirit that Chen's boss, Xi Jinping, said to show no mercy. Chen Jianguo, just as in Tibet, he's recruited natives to help, including Han Chinese people who live there, who go, as you've heard about, on home visits, which is really a kind of inspection, which can make, you see the blank stare on the faces of the Uyghur hosts. They might be sent to a camp after this, their children confiscated, and so on. And I do think that this trustworthiness is a code word for the classification that I'm talking about. These are the people to be undone. These are the people to be eradicated as a distinct people. So Darren Byler just captured this in an interview he made recently, where trustworthiness means aligning yourself with the Chinese state to be Chinese, and it's all targeting the native peoples. What was once communist class struggle under Mao has been replaced by racism, and that is, what this genocide is about, to undo these people. There's a couple of more notes that things I have been thinking about regarding this trustworthiness. It echoes the social credit system that now is more and more conditioning the everyday lives of ordinary Chinese. So it's an example of how practices from China, just as with the torture of the Falun Gong and so on, is taken to Xinjiang and then elaborated there or intensified there. But it's part of the practices. And this, I think, is also what's happening globally, that the Chinese leaders and Communist Party are exporting means of oppression and so on to the abroad and expecting that to work. It's a certain amount of hubris involved. And it's very fascinating, number two, that this goes back to imperial Chinese concepts of how the people should be obedient. They should be the Liang Min, the good people, as opposed to bandits or barbarians who don't want to be conquered. They all deserve punishment as criminals, which is something I have written about separately. But currently this concept, trustworthiness as a reincarnation of this idea of good people that till the land and stay where they are and don't rebel, it's also something that's very creatively re-weaponized as a tool of genocide with Chinese characteristics in Xinjiang. If you are ethnic, you are untrustworthy. How are these categories implemented in practice is a big question. We hear about how people get arrested and sent to camps, detained and sent to camps. There's one single image among all the satellite pictures that show detainees in two different colors, red and blue, on the ground, as seen from the sky from a satellite. And it's unclear what this really means. Is there a color coding that goes with a certain fate? Could it mean that some of them have a predetermined end station of being sent to prison or even killed? This is something we don't know. It's a point that has not been leaked yet, that we don't know about. Then beyond this issue of classification that I think is so closely aligned between what happened in Nazi-occupied Czechia in Europe and in Chinese-occupied Xinjiang or East Turkestan, a couple of aspects to mention is the way they, in their propaganda, build these fake camps and then invite gullible foreigners. I wrote a piece about this. Another is that before the foreign criticism, international criticism even got started, because people were not in early 2018, late 2017, people were not yet aware around the world that this new effort was happening. They actually published images of these camps on the internet, locally in China, not thinking that foreigners would see them. And this is fascinating. The Nazis did the same. And it was to show the majority population, the Germans, the Han Chinese, that we're dealing with these terrorists and bandits the way they should be dealt. We're dealing with them harshly. And now, of course, this had become material for accusing the Chinese government of the crimes that they are committing. Another very interesting parallel is the appropriation of children or confiscation of children that are cut off from their native culture and then reared in their master race language. I think that the scale of this is actually bigger in China, and it's also based on this same notion that was at work in Czechia under Heydrich, that among the people is a certain amount of people that can be transformed, and especially if you get them early. So if you can take them away from their culture, away from the influence of their parents and whatnot, you have a better chance of appropriating them as good people, trustworthy people. Another example, a couple of images from the cultural genocide that's playing out in China. The two pictures on the left are private citizens' experiences showing up on Chinese social media, having your books confiscated because they're in Uyghur or because there's a Quran. And on the bottom, being forced to tear up your interior design because it's not Chinese enough. And you must now be Chinese, so you have to destroy your own home. On the right-hand side, the assault on the elite, so to speak, of Uyghur and Kazakh culture. The singer on the top, Ablajan, is disappeared into the camps and rumored to have been sentenced to a lengthy prison term for making videos like this. Modern Uyghur music showing children that are proud to be Uyghur and modern at the same time, which is not allowed under this new regime. The Uyghur is something to get rid of, and to be modern means to be Chinese. And the panda is how a Uyghur cemetery was remade and redecorated. It's a cemetery that used to have a grave, the tomb of one of the most famous modern poets in the Uyghur language. Even more stunning is this, as yet unfinished list of the decapitated Uyghur and Kazakh cultural world. All these people who are fluent in Chinese, highly educated, cultural leaders, artists, academics, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them who are now gone. And the disappearance of which, of course, is an assault on the confidence and pride of regular people. This is something I also imagine must have been the case in Heydrich's Czechia when he annihilated the intelligentsia there. So to conclude, I see the Chinese Communist Party and the Nazis as having closely aligned goals. Purifying or unifying, the vocabulary is slightly different, their nation. And the vocabulary derives either from race theory or nationalism. But the goal is to expand state power, to colonize this area of Xinjiang, and to build a dominance beyond this area. And the means, again, that are so similar are the classification that is mounted to target the undesirable ethnic group, and then proceed to work on them, to force them to convert or die, whether it's the Germanization or in the past or the Sinopsization that we see today. The ultimate goal being to eradicate these people. And I think I'm ending here. I think my main message is that the world has not yet, in terms of international reactions, the world has not yet fully realized that this is happening in this manner. And not just the facts of the actions that the Chinese government is taking, but also the intent, the goal of actually undoing the existence of these peoples as such, which is the formulation of the Genocide Convention. That is something that people and countries around the world have not yet fully embraced. We see Macron and Merkel and others talking about insisting on a UN inspection, which of course is stalled because Michelle Bachelet at the UN Human Rights Council doesn't want to send people to these fake camps. She knows very well that that is what they want to arrange. So there's a stalemate. And I think we have enough facts, but the interpretation is lagging in terms of world reactions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this interesting presentation with the parallel to Czech Republic and Czech people. There will be a lot of questions for Czech listeners for sure. And now let me give the floor to Andrea Worden. Andrea, if you are here, please, the floor is yours. Yeah, I will just ask Professor Fiskeo, could you finish your presentation so we can see Andrea? Thank you. Wonderful. Hello, Andrea. Yes, we can see you. Please.
Thank you. It's so nice to see you and to be here. I hope someday soon we'll be able to meet in person again in Prague. I look forward to that. So, wow, that's hard to follow. I like how the professor ended with his main message. I think I'm going to start with my main message, which is, based on what we just heard from Magnus and from Kate, really the like-minded democracies cannot participate in the upcoming Olympics in Beijing. Right. So anyway, so main message is, I think that the democracies need to figure out how best to sort of coordinate and be unified in that message that we want to have nothing to do with this, which is going to absolutely be a sort of a modern replay of the 1936 Nazi Olympics. But prior to that, I think it's important, I think the first thing I want to sort of address is that many of the calls at the moment with respect to the Winter Olympics focus on asking the IOC to move the Olympics from China somewhere else, right? Just get them out of Beijing and out of China, and that would be a great solution. But that is extremely unlikely. So I'm going to start with just kind of going over, and I'll try to be, I know we're running a bit late on time, short on time, so I'm going to try to move through this fairly quickly. I'm going to touch on a few reasons why I think that that's essentially virtually impossible. The Winter Games will be held in China. And then next, I'll touch briefly on the relationship between the UN and the International Olympic Committee, IOC. And then thirdly, I'm going to also just sort of touch on a few points in addition to what Magnus and Kate just discussed in terms of other human rights-based reasons why we shouldn't be participating. Sort of the community of democracies should not be participating in the Beijing 2022 Olympics. And sort of, what should we do? Okay, so first, so basically there are a couple of reasons why it's virtually impossible that the IOC will move the games out of China. And in part, I mean, there's certainly a financial reason, right? Sunk costs are a big part of it, and also just income that won't be made if the games are moved. Reputational interest, both of the IOC and of China, and then there are other reasons too. For example, there is no precedent for moving the games once the host city has been decided. There have been 3 cancellations of Olympic Games in the past, and these were due to World War I and World War II. And of course, now we have the first postponement of the Olympic Games because of COVID-19. So no historical precedent. And also, probably most importantly, as we've been hearing about in the news and reports from the folks who met recently with the IOC officials, the IOC's position is one of political neutrality. If you listen to sort of Thomas Bach's speeches, that's a constant refrain. We are politically neutral. It means that the IOC, will not make any assessment of China's human rights record, nor take any related action. There's no authority, and that goes counter to the Olympic Charter and the IOC's stance. So what is interesting, though, of course, is that the IOC has shifted a bit with its reforms in the Olympic Agenda 2020, which was adopted in 2017, to introduce some human rights requirements, including that the host city must comply with the UN guiding principles on business and human rights. But these, of course, don't apply. I'm sure that by design to the 2022 Olympics in Beijing. They will first take effect in 2024 in Paris. So another reason why the IOC in China, well, the IOC won't dare to move the games, is that there already has been great fanfare around the fact that Beijing will be the first ever city to host both the summer games and the winter games. So this is a first. You know, and of course we know China likes big firsts, and the IOC is all about this big first too. If you, I listened recently to Thomas Bach's brief message to the citizens of Beijing, where he congratulates them on the unveiling of the emblem for the Winter Games. The emblem is titled Winter Dream. And so on December 15, 2017, Bach said that this unveiling of this emblem is another important step to make history for Beijing as the first city in the world to host both the summer and winter editions of the Olympic Games. The emblem stands for the vision of Beijing 2022, showcasing the best of China to the world, the unique blend of modern and ancient traditions, end quote. Concluding, he said, the IOC is truly honored to be working side by side with our Chinese friends to make history in this Olympic city once again. Another reason, the IOC has 4 vice presidents who are just under Thomas Bach in the IOC hierarchy, and one of them happens to be a PRC national by the name of Yu Zaiqing. He's been a member of the IOC since 2000. He served on the executive board of the IOC from 2004 to 2012, and he also had a previous stint as a vice president. But very curiously, I found in July of this, in July 2020, he had his VP term extended, even though he has reached the IOC age limit. So his term has been extended until 2025. Anyway, so I'll leave that there. I thought that was quite interesting. As noted earlier, financial interests are a huge factor. One example, Alibaba is one of the Olympic partners. This is a program, the acronym is TOPS for the Olympic partners. So large multinational companies like Coke, Dow, GE, Toyota, Omega, among others. This is the highest level of Olympic sponsorship. This group of about 13 or 14 sponsors invest a total of around $100 million each to obtain this level of Olympic sponsorship. Bach has said they are critical for the staging of the Olympic Games and their global reach and understanding. They help us communicate the Olympic values to people around the world. So as a side note, I just wanted to mention in terms about Alibaba, participants in Beijing's 2019 South-South Human Rights Forum were invited to on a quote-unquote public diplomacy visit to Alibaba's headquarters in Hangzhou. Professor Shren Bin of Tsinghua said of this public diplomacy occasion that it was an opportunity for the foreign visitors to see for themselves how China has how China has realized the right to development in recent years, so that, quote, they can change their traditional Euro-American conception of human rights, end quote. So I imagine we're going to see there will probably be similar side trips and public diplomacy sorts of opportunities for people during the Winter Olympics. Alibaba, front and center. Okay, so next I'd like to talk a little bit, just briefly, about the relationship between the UN and the IOC and just sort of the Olympic ideal and Olympic values and human rights. In the mid-1990s, a biennial agenda item was created by the General Assembly titled, quote, Building a Peaceful and Better World Through Sport and the Olympic Ideal. And this agenda item would reaffirm the observance of the Olympic truce before each summer and winter games. So once every 2 years, there would be a General Assembly resolution on the Olympics. So that was in the mid-90s, as I mentioned. And then in April 2014, the IOC and the UN concluded a memorandum of understanding, and the General Assembly passed a resolution by consensus supporting the leadership position of the IOC and the autonomy of sport. At the time, earlier, Ban Ki-moon had famously said, quote, "Olympic principles are UN principles," end quote. Bach wrote at the time, "This resolution recognizes the contribution of sport to foster dialogue, peace, and development. It affirms the invaluable contribution of the Olympic movement in establishing sport as a unique means for the promotion of peace and development. And it also encourages member states to give sport due consideration in the context of the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN." When Antonio Guterres became UN Secretary General in January 2017, the partnership between the IOC and the UN became even closer. Guterres and Bach agreed to establish a, quote, "direct partnership between the UN and the IOC. As a result, relatedly, Guterres abruptly decided to close the UN Office on Sport for Development and Peace, which was a standalone office. The substantive portfolio then would move to, wait for it, the Department of Economic and Social Affairs, DESA, which we know is effectively controlled by China, by the Chinese government. So interestingly, the first media outlet to announce the news of the closure of the Office on Sport for Development and Peace was Xinhua. And Xinhua was the only news agency to report on the purported reason or assumed reason. It described the closure as a, quote, as an apparent cost-saving measure, end quote. But no reason was given publicly by the IOC or the UN for this move, which happened within a few months of Guterres becoming a Secretary General. I found that quite curious. Anyway, moving to the Human Rights Council. So in addition to the biennial UN General Assembly resolution on building a peaceful and better world through sport and the Olympic ideal, there's also a thematic item in the Human Rights Council, which is entitled Promoting Human Rights Through Sport and the Olympic Ideal. There have been quite a few resolutions on the issue of sport and human rights, including my favorite, a Human Rights Council Advisory Committee report. So among other things, the most recent resolution on the topic in June 2020 calls on states, the IOC, the UN, and UN specialized agencies to, quote, maximize the potential of sport to make a meaningful and sustainable contribution to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals of the 2030 Agenda. This is obviously, this is a good thing, great, right? But what about human rights? I think what we're seeing here, I think, is another example of sort of human rights getting sort of buried under or sort of pushed to the side for sustainable development, right? Sort of getting buried under the development framework. So the Olympics are also supposed to be an enabler of all human rights, but again, that seems to be shifting towards development. I even saw some language somewhere, either in a resolution or a statement on the HRC website, that the Olympics are also now being invoked as something that can help with COVID-19 recovery. So anyway, all of this gets bundled together as a big win for China, at least in terms of optics, and a distraction from Chinese government's human rights record and its very problematic COVID response. Okay, in December 2019, the General Assembly adopted the Olympic resolution, Sport for Development and Peace, building a peaceful and better world through sport and the Olympic ideal for the upcoming Tokyo Olympic Games. The PRC ambassador to the UN, Zhang Jun, used the opportunity to make a statement introducing the Winter 2022 Beijing Games. He didn't mention human rights once in his statement, and I'm just quoting a part of his statement. Quote, "Do we want multilateralism or unilateralism? Unity or division? Cooperation or confrontation? Progress or regress? On these major issues of principle, China's attitude is very clear. We firmly stand by multilateralism, side with the vast majority of the UN members, stand for fairness and justice, and side with the trend of the times. We share the same world and a common future. China will always be a builder of world peace, a contributor to global development, and a defender of the international order. And of course, will work toward building a community of shared future for mankind. So he's bringing that, so right, the building of a shared future sort of into the Olympics, and, I think, which is not a surprise for many of us. Katja, how much time do I have? Oh,
3 minutes,
please.
Oh,
okay, that's okay. All right, I will speak quickly. Okay, all right. Okay, we're at All right, I'll go to 11:15. Okay. All right. So, assuming the games proceed in Beijing, what should the democracies do? So quickly, in addition to the egregious human rights violations currently underway that we know about already, and we've heard about today, my co-panelist did a very sobering job explaining those. I think that countries, governments need to be focused on the human rights implications of just being present in Beijing for this event. Political hostage taking. Totally, like, we've got a lot of people there, why not, right? So I'm thinking of the 2 Canadian Michaels, the Australians, Yang Hengjun and Cheng Lei, and other political prisoners, Gui Minhai, and let's not forget about Wang Bingzhang too. Media. So the Australian reporters recently had to flee China, right? And so many US journalists getting kicked out of China. Who's going to cover the games? How are we going to get a sort of reporting about what's actually really happening aside from like the Chinese government approved narrative, right? So this is going to be PRC's discourse power at its finest, because it's unclear if how will independent journalists be able to operate. Also, the Olympic Village, the players, there's privacy, safety concerns, facial recognition. The apps to get into the village, into the venues. Facial recognition, surveillance, big data collection. What if there's a health scare, right? All of these things, very troubling. I can imagine the opening and closing ceremonies, happy Uyghurs and Tibetans dancing together on ice, right? We should not in any way be complicit with this. So the Washington Post editorial board over the past few months has actually published two editorials in which it has questioned whether or not China should be hosting these games, right? And whether China has the moral standing to host the 2022 Winter Olympic Games. The Washington Post editorial board said, we think not, right? So again, assuming the IOC did not withdraw the games from Beijing, so what do we do? I think we should gather as many allies and partners as possible to take a principled stand for human rights and refuse to confer legitimacy on Beijing. And then we also look for, think about alternatives. So boycotting the games, but also arrange for alternative games in other venues, perhaps Korea, Japan, Canada, Salt Lake City. This was done when the US led a boycott of the Moscow Games in 1980, right? So that's one thought. Anyway, so let me just skip over a whole bunch of stuff. And I want to make one final point. So Bloomberg had asked so Wang Wenbin, one of the spokespeople for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, asked him about the media reports that indicate that some were pushing for the International Olympic Committee to reconsider Beijing's hosting of the 2022 Winter Games, as politicians around the world voiced increasing concerns over China's human rights records. What's China's response? So he basically says, this is it's not an objective statement. The fact is that the majority of countries and people in the world recognize the fact that China's human rights conditions are constantly improving, and China's achieved notable progress. At a recent UN Human Rights Council session, most countries voiced approval and support for China's position on issues related to Xinjiang and Hong Kong, as also Magnus just mentioned. He also goes on to say that these calls for boycotts go against the spirit of the Olympic Charter and disrupts and jeopardizes the progress of the global human rights cause. So I thought that language was very interesting and very concerning. It's like, this is our show now. We're leading the way in terms of defining, leading the global human rights agenda and defining it, redefining it. So really, finally, 1 year before the opening ceremony of the Beijing Olympics, so 1 year before will be February 2021, which is coming up. Invitations are sent out by the IOC to the National Olympic Committees. So I think February 2021 is like a sort of a good marker for a plan for some sort of coordinated action. How do governments respond to the invitation to attend the Winter Games in Beijing in 2022? Okay, that's it. Thanks, I'll stop there.
Thank you, wonderful, Andrea. Thank you very much. Now we have some time for questions. So let me start with the first one, that it's to all of you, to all of our three speakers. And it's about, just a minute, while individual academics are leading voices in exposing human rights abuses in Tibet and Xinjiang, Western universities collaborate in technology transfer towards the CCP repression effort. Can this change? What role can academia and academics play in responding to these genosocial policies? Wow, that should be a question to all of you three. So if I may start with maybe Dr. Fiskesio, please.
Thank you so much, and thank you to Andrea also for a very interesting presentation from you. It's nice to meet you virtually. I would like to say about what academics can do that I think that information and interpretation is what we do, and it's what we should be doing. Try to tell people how to interpret the news and how to read beyond the news. And if we can, on the one hand, demand our own universities to investigate, do we have projects run from our university that supports the genocide in Xinjiang or something like that? We should investigate. And of course, in each of our countries, we can also be activists and raise demands. But I do think the number one is our duty to inform and analyze and spread the word. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If I may ask maybe Andrea and then Kate, if she's still here, please, Andrea.
Yes, thank you. Thanks. And thanks, also, Magnus. It's very nice to meet you as well. I'm sorry, I'm not even going to try to pronounce your last name, so if I can just call you Magnus. Okay. Well, I mean, basically, I think you nailed it. Inform, analyze, and then also the obvious for us as academics, writers, people, just whatever, whether it's folks, teaching, researching, giving whatever interviews, whatever it might be, also to absolutely not self-censor, right? So, and to be very clear and upfront also with our students about what is going on. This obviously came to a head this fall with the Hong Kong national security law, and sort of the now heightened risks of essentially teaching really sort of, I think, anything relating to Chinese politics and human rights. So to be candid, forthright, and not to self-censor and to demand accountability from our institutions if they are doing something that may well be supporting human rights abuses in China or anywhere.
Thank you very much, Andrea. Now, if Kate is still online, maybe Kate, can you answer as well? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. And thank you for those two great presentations, Marcus and Andrea. That's really great. I learned a lot with those. So I would echo exactly what both have said, but perhaps I would say Marcus referred to an information gap. I agree completely with that. I would say not only an information gap, but also an interpretation gap. So it's even more crucial now to understand and to decrypt the ideological DNA and the language of the Communist Party in terms of understanding the situation and how it relates to Tibetans. And I would also say to academics always to speak to and to try to talk to Tibetans themselves in terms of gaining an insight. Tibetans, there's a new generation of trilingual Tibetans who have come from Tibet, who have very deep understanding and insights into the systematic ways in which the Communist Party policies are transforming their culture, which need to be taken into account. I would also say that in terms of academic conferences, or any conferences on the region, always to endeavour to have Tibetan speakers. I've just seen an example of this. There's a conference bringing together experts across the Himalayas and across the world on water and on environmental issues in the Himalayas, and there's people there from many different Western countries, many different Asian countries, but not one Tibetan speaker. So I would simply suggest that.
Thank you very much, Kate. I can't see more questions, so I will ask for last time. If there are any questions, you can send them or write them directly to our chat, or you can also use our Facebook and ask via our Facebook. Give us a few more minutes, we can check if there are any more. Oh yeah, there's one more from Philip asking Kate Saunders. Kate, could you compare what is going in Tibet, Xinjiang, and southern Mongolia? And while in the beginning of the Xinjiang campaign, it was informed by Chen's experience from crackdown in Tibet, is now the Tibetan regime learning from the Xinjiang experience? So, please. Kate, question to you.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's a key question, and many of you will have seen Adrian Zentz's recent research on the new military-style training programs in Tibet, which have been developed. So there are a number of important differences and also problems with applying the Xinjiang model to what's happening in Tibet. I think that there are important similarities in both places. The PRC is using the rubric, the very opaque rubric of poverty alleviation to further extend the reach of the state into the lives of people, Uyghurs and Tibetans, to extend surveillance and social control mechanisms in Tibet. And I think also we don't have the same evidence of mass internment in Tibet. But Adrian has documented a network of military-style vocational training camps, which are being used for displaced rural workers. And these mass programs are similarly linked in terms of there's a major focus on indoctrination, there's a major focus on ideological training and intrusive surveillance measures. And these intrusive social control measures were first implemented in a mass scale in Tibetan areas when Chen Guangguo was based there prior to his transfer to Xinjiang. And then there's been a sort of feedback loop as these measures are employed in Xinjiang, with some elements of them being redeployed inside Tibet on an even larger scale than before. So these are top down. As Marcus referred to, Chen was a sort of creative implementer of top-down policies. Of course, he's been the person most associated with them and named in terms of possible sanctions with the Magnitsky-style mechanisms that are attracting a lot more interest these days. But it's very much he was the person who implemented those from the top down. Does that answer the question?
may I have a question?
Oh, sorry, could I add one thing to that answer, which is that there is cooperation as well in terms of military training with Xinjiang troops and also Tibetan troops. They actually train together on the Tibetan plateau in high altitude specialist gyms, which and I think that we're seeing the results in terms of the tougher policies and the higher levels of militarization. Sorry.
Thank you, Kate. So Professor Lomova first, and then Didi is waving, and then we have one question from audience. So please, Professor.
Yeah, I just have a brief remark regarding the presentation of Magnus. Actually, recently there was a well-known Czech professor who criticized Sinopsis for criticizing China and human rights abuses in China, saying, yes, in Xinjiang, they are re-education camps, but they are no concentration camps, and we should understand that there is a difference, yeah, etc. So it fits, and I, of course, for quite some time think about the analogies between the Nazi solution of removing population, unwanted population. So I just make this remark, and if you were interested, I would very much appreciate if I could translate your article into Czech, because the comparison with Heydrich should be moving for Czech people who just don't want to understand what's going on in Xinjiang. And if you have this kind of touching example that really touches on your own national experience, it may perhaps help people thinking differently about China's achievement in the field of human rights. Thank you.
Yeah, Magnus, if you want to react, please.
Oh, yes. I just thank you very much. I am very interested in hearing more. And when I finish this article, which I hope is very soon, I certainly would love to send it. And the only point I would like to add is that I find what's very striking about the Nazis is how the final solution, the concentration camps, all of that was a work in progress. They were they didn't have a complete ready plan. They were developing the methods and along the way, and Heydrich's role was to be a creative part of that and a leader of that development. But that's not widely understood. I find many people somehow believe that they had a ready-made killing machine. In the beginning, they talked about expelling people and sending them to Madagascar. Heydrich talked about sending people from Prague to Madagascar to get rid of them. And I don't think he was joking. He was not ready. He was not at the point yet where he was going to put people in a gas oven or execute them. And this is contributing to, I think, a lot of misunderstanding, that the Nazis actually were inventing some of this as they went along. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. We are really looking forward to your article that should be on Sinopsis in English and Czech very soon. Didi, you have one question, and then we have a question from audience. Yeah. Let's go first.
Thank you very much. This discussion about Sinicization, Germanification, Chen Guo and Heydrich just got me racing to look through something that I actually wrote in 2012 when I was in Beijing for the International Herald Tribune, where I was in the Great Hall of the People, and Hu Deping, the son of Hu Yaobang, gave a speech in a small closed circle where he described contemporary China as quote unquote fascist in public, in Chinese, in the Great Hall of the People. And this really sort of struck me, because this was going towards a direction of these comparisons with the Communist Party and Nazism that I think people have been unwilling to go into for various reasons. And Magnus, you yourself raised the reasons why, for example, not willing to draw parallels that perhaps aren't quite correct or etc. But it really just struck me that this concept of, you know, fascism is actually discussed, of course, in China and even among very, very high level officials. So that was sort of super interesting, and I can send you that article if you're interested. But it was kind of a strange moment, yeah, of course. Anyway, but that's a whole other issue there. My actual point, as well as that, was to make to ask that if we're going to be in this sort of territory of personalities, which I think is completely fascinating. Chen Guo, what kind of a person is he? I heard a rumor, and I was wondering if you'd heard this too, that he was an orphan and was sort of raised in state orphanages in China. I don't know if this is correct, and I'm not impugning anyone who is an orphan who's been well treated and raised happily. I think this is wonderful, but I'm just wondering if we're going to get into psychological territory, which is brilliantly interesting, whether this is something that you've researched and looked into, his actual childhood experiences. I also did quite a lot of research into Xi Jinping himself and his childhood experiences in some of the archives in Beijing when I was still there, not long after this thingy happened in the Great Hall of the People with Fascism. And you know, this childhood development and the formation of a certain type of personality, somebody perhaps like Chen Guo, just a comment. And I wonder if you've thought about that and gone there at all.
Thank you very much. And the short answer is no, I haven't, but I'm very interested in psychological interpretations and information, and I think it is very important to try to understand. I had not heard about him growing up in orphanages. I think there would often be this a resentment if oneself. I've only read that he grew up during the famines in the early 60s, and so he would have been suffering, and maybe those people who have been suffering, like Xi Jinping in his cave or village, they would resent others not also suffering like they do. Then there's the very interesting aspect of whether there are these Oedipal complexes. Just as George Bush the younger had to invade Iraq because his father didn't complete the job, there's been people writing about how Xi Jinping's father was in charge of Xinjiang, but he was kind of nice to them. And so now the son has to somehow finish the job. Those are very speculative thoughts, but I think the psychology of these people definitely would play a role, and it's just very hard to know.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Judy, for question. Magnus, for reaction. We have two more questions from audience, so let me read them. One is actually for all of you. It's one question from audience member. In relation to the first panel, are any of the panelists aware tech transfer that is being used to target Uyghurs or Tibetans? I don't know, maybe Didi would like to add something as well, if you don't know. Or so Magnus, Kate, Andrea, if you can react, any one of you, please. No.
I could. I'm sorry. Could you repeat that question?
Of course. In relation to the first panel, are any of these panelists aware of tech transfer that is being used to target Uyghurs or Tibetans?
There are there's a facial recognition system which was created in a company in Hamburg, I believe, and I would have to chase down the name of the company. But it was sold to China. So I don't know and you know, this kind of example is of course very worth following. I don't know where it went in the end, but you know, Maya Wang in Human Rights Watch report did a lot of tracking of technology and how it's used. And I think that the fundamental point that we have to remember with technology transfer is that when you think of where China was in 1949, essentially pretty much everything that has pretty much all the technology in China, frankly, today at some point was taken or brought over from the West or reinvented or you know, they talk about this being a 再创新, you know, reinvented, redigested, etc. And of course, there has been some recent innovative development, yes, no question, but very often it's the second line development. So they will take a foundational technology from somewhere outside China and reshape it, rework it, very often do a very good job. You know, TikTok and WeChat are two very good examples of technology that's actually really great to use if it was safe. Yeah, so that's specifically with Tibet, Xinjiang, I guess Human Rights Watch might be a good source for that.
Thank you, Lily. Kate is waving to us, so maybe she would like to add something, and then Magnus. Kate, please.
Oh, I was actually waving with regard to the last point, but on the tech transfer, most definitely there are transfers and exchanges with particularly related to facial recognition technology, and of course Chen numerous methods were used in Tibet in terms of, for instance, Hikvision, the facial recognition technology which identified apparently ethnic minorities, although I'm not sure how advanced that is at the moment, but that was used on the Tibet Railway in the early stages, and there's a lot of interest and transfer of skills. Of course, in the UK Parliament, we have Hikvision cameras, and in various shops, here the facial recognition technology is utilised. So there are many exchanges.
Thank you, Kate. Yeah, I can just add that in Czech lower Senate we have some Hikvision cameras as well. They were given by some Czech business people. Magnus, please.
Oh, I remember one case. There's a geneticist at Yale University who collaborated with Chinese geneticists for the genetic profiling of ethnic minority people in China. And I don't remember the name right now, but I think it's possible to look up. And that is one example. I do believe there are more. Thank you.
Was that actually something to do with Fisher? Was that Sui Liui at the New York Times who did that story? She pulled something together about that. Was an American company, right? That was doing this genetic profiling. I think.
Yes, and this scientist at Yale helped devise the procedures that they took with them back. And there was also, I think, a big interview with him on NPR, the American public radio station, where this geneticist was apologetic and said he didn't understand that his help could be misused or anything like that. So it made a bit of a splash. I think several news organizations wrote about it, and NPR actually spoke to him. I could also find that link.
Right, I have it right here. It was a Massachusetts company, Yale researcher. Yeah. It was Thermo Fisher.
Mm-hmm.
Kenneth Kidd and Thermo Fisher, Uyghur DNA.
Mm-hmm.
Thermo Fisher.
Can we ask you to share this link with us on our
Yeah,
chat?
Chat. Yeah.
And also the article that you mentioned before. So
yeah,
we can share with all our audience. Wonderful. We have another 2 questions. So I'm sorry. I will read them. The first one is from Frank Uris, and he's asking, it seems that there is more awareness about animal cruelty than on what's happening in Xinjiang and Tibet. As it was highlighted that China is extremely good at co-opting international organizations, shouldn't local NGOs and civil society groups pressure the policymakers on standing against genocide taking place in the 21st century? Question to all of you. So maybe Magnus, if you can start. I can see you nodding, please.
Well, I certainly agree that we should speak up, and that countries and governments should speak up. There was a longer list of countries around the world, not just European countries and Australia, Japan, but several other countries like Haiti and other countries joined in recently at the United Nations to protest, and so this tide seemed to be turning a bit on that arena, which is the UN in Geneva. But certainly we should try and push for people to speak up and protest and take action.
Thank you. Maybe Kate or Andrea, do you want to add something? No? So there is one question actually to all of you, but I think it's more for Andrea. Julia is asking how to reply to those who argue that trying to isolate China, for example, not attending the Olympic Games, will only harden its stance, give more arguments to staunch nationalists, and maybe make it more difficult to reach any improvement in the conditions of people in Xinjiang and Tibet. So Andrea, may I ask you for answer, please? Or Magnus?
Oh, yeah, certainly. Okay, yes, can you hear me? It's good. Okay. Right, it's an excellent question and observation, but I think that if we look back to the 2008 Olympics and then sort of magnify that, 1,000-fold, I think it's clear that really the Olympics ended up being a human rights disaster, both before, during, and after in 2008. And it created the conditions really for stronger authoritarian rule for someone like Xi Jinping to come to power and implement the policies that he's implementing now. And so that I think that that we shouldn't, that our participating in the Olympics will not have any. I don't see any benefit, and I only see harm, really, based on the experience in 2008. I mean, China, right? I think just very recently at the Xinjiang Work Forum, right? Xi Jinping said, "These policies are great. They're correct. And we're just going to keep doing what we're doing, and also start to sort of implement these similar policies in Tibet, right?" So I mean, the nationalism, point is also, I mean, it's well taken, but I just think that looking at the sort of the sort of the pros and cons of either participating or not participating, I think overwhelmingly in my view, the sort of the non-participation is actually, I think, in the long term, more effective than, I mean, basically, if we participate, we just become part of an enormous propaganda ploy, right? And these are Xi Jinping's Olympics, and if we're there, we are basically giving him and these policies legitimacy. So I hope that answered did that sort of answer the question? Anybody else? Maybe have thoughts?
Magnus, maybe if you would like to add something, or Kate, this question to all of you.
I'll pass.
Sorry, Magnus. You go first.
No, I'll pass.
He's passing.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Passing to you.
I would simply back up exactly what Andrea said, particularly that given Tibet was the human rights issue of the 2008 Olympics, and one of the reasons I mentioned that so prominently in my comments was to complement what Andrea was saying about the upcoming Winter Olympics, but also to say that it also supports China's aim of its particular focus of its propaganda and telling the story on Tibet is about openness, and it's weaponizing the whole idea of access to Tibet, and at the same time as shutting down Tibetans and locking in Tibetans. It claims it's in a new era of openness, and so in that sense, participation would certainly engage with that exercise. And it's noticeable that China has pursued this message, particularly since the legislation, the Reciprocal Access to Tibet Act, which referred to exactly this weaponizing of access and shutting down of Tibet. And that was in 2018. And so the party slogan is please come in, then go out and tell the world. But as we know, the more accurate translation of that is please come in if we allow you to do so and on our conditions, and then go out and tell the world what we tell you to tell them.
Thank you. That was great. We don't have more questions. Maybe they are in chat, so we can answer them tomorrow. Or if there are any questions that will be emailed, then we can answer them tomorrow. Now I think it's time to thank our speakers for sharing their opinions and ideas. Thank you all for meeting us online or switching on. It was a pleasure. And I'm looking forward to see you again tomorrow. We will start at 9:30 a.m. CST time, so check Prague time, CST. Have a nice evening or day for some of you, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.